civil society organizations in Zimbabwe to sensitize them around the Africa peer review mechanism process. So my name is Eda Joa. I'm with Csos Institute, and we are leading this process in Zimbabwe with technical support from the South African Institute for International Affairs. So my role today is the program director, but that's essentially to help us get through today's program and today's session and the discussions that we're going to be having. Just a quick housekeeping rules. If we can just continue to have our microphones on mute and not unmute ourselves unless we are talking or making any contributions, that will help. And if you can also sign in and make sure you're logged in and put in your name, your full name and your organization, so that we can also see who's part of the process today. So I'm going to quickly hand over to Dr. Tendai Murisa, who's the Executive Director of the Csos Institute, to give us his welcome remarks and to just give a brief outline of today's activities.
Thanks, Ed, and good morning, colleagues, friends, and fellow comrades. Good morning to you all, and welcome to this discussion. It is a discussion, and I hope that it will be a very open discussion. So maybe let me greet everyone in their languages. And I also see my colleagues from Csos Institute are here, so they'll guide us through what is going to happen. But just as a way of background, for those who were not in the first meeting, this is a very important process and occasion for Zimbabwe. And we are privileged as Csos Institute to be working with colleagues from the South Africa Institute for International Affairs, just to, just for a rollout, a discussion around how we can also plug into the processes. The Aprm has got a longer history than our February 2020 signing on. The Aprm has been in existence since around 2002. And it is both symbolic and also very significant for the African continent, because it is the first of a kind whereby African leaders on their own said, we need to be checking in on each other. We need a peer review mechanism amongst ourselves, because over the decades, over the years, Africa has been reviewed by outsiders, outsiders coming to tell us how to run our affairs, etc., etc. And I would say that that was at the point of where we may say the beginning of a renaissance of sorts that was being promoted by President Mbeki and also President Obasanjo of Nigeria at the time. And since then, many African countries have signed on to the Aprm, and many other African countries have had more than one review, and those reviews have been discussed at the AU level, and they've contributed to improved governance, improved discussions on how countries can move forward. And it was a pity that even though Zimbabwe was involved in the discussions earlier on in 2002, up until 2020 were not signed on. So when the government of Zimbabwe signed on in February 2020, it was a moment of for some of us who've been tracking. For some of us who've been tracking the work of the APRA. Oh, by the way, the house rules are that people, colleagues should mute their mics, and also the host can help us to mute some mics if maybe colleagues are speaking without realizing that their mics are on. So starting from then now, having it signed in February 2020, unfortunately we then have coronavirus, and our attention is swayed, and we begin focusing on how to save lives, how to contribute towards just sustaining livelihoods, and also a response to the COVID-19. So unfortunately, colleagues in government who are here will also give us an update on where they are. But you can imagine what has happened. 2020 is for many a lost year in the sense that we did not manage to do quite a lot of things despite the noble commitments that we have made. So with those words, I would just like to say, welcome, feel free. This is a potentially a unique platform for some of us in civil society, we may not have interacted with colleagues from government, and for colleagues in government, they may not have interacted with us. So this is a unique opportunity for us to engage in what we call constructive dialogue around, number one, learning from others. We're going to be learning from other countries that have been on this journey before us in the region. And also we'll be hearing from colleagues from the Aprm Secretariat, which is very important for us to understand how things are done, the protocols of carrying out these review reports, etc. Then we'll also be discussing amongst ourselves on how we want to organize ourselves and how we want to move forward. There's a lot of work that has already been done from our end. We've been on this journey with, like I said, with South Africa Institute for International Affairs for close to 3 months now, and we've been working behind the scenes. And there's still some more work to be done beyond this meeting. But for now, just to say welcome. The program is rich. Our program director is going to take us through. But at any moment, if colleagues feel like they want a point clarified, they want explanations made, feel free to do that. Let's come to this with an open mind. Let's be open-minded about engaging. It's our process. We are grateful that government has signed, and it's a process that we want to make sure that we are contributing towards and making sure that the report that sort of is eventually produced reflects the views of the broader society beyond a few. So with those words, just to say thank you for making it, and we hope you'll stay with us until 1 p.m. And we're starting on time, and we hope that we'll also be able to finish on time. So indulge us if for any instance we find like we are going on a rabbit trail. We have also made contingency plans for that. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Great. Thank you so much, Tendai, for those welcome remarks. And yes, our aim is to try and keep on time. But I think, as you mentioned, that it is also a free and open discussion, and we would like to get as much out of it as possible. So next in our program, we've got some time. We have set aside some time for just to hear from the government of Zimbabwe, but through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, which is where currently the Africa peer review mechanism process sits, just for their insights and also view of the Africa peer review mechanism process, and to just hear the official position at the moment as to where we're at with the process. So we were expecting Ambassador Faranisi, who's the Chief Director of Multilateral Affairs, to
and he's here.
Give these.
He's here.
Oh, yeah. That's great. Thanks so much, Tendai. So, Ambassador Faranisi, I'm going to hand over to you for just about 5-10 minutes to just give us your insights, but give us the insights from the ministry around the Africa peer review mechanism process. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much. You never give one of the top civil servants that long, because then I could easily turn it into a rally. Huh? Okay, thank you. Dr. Tendai Mrisa, Executive Director of Severe Institute, Mr. Dalma Jama, Head of the Strategic Planning and Aprm Coordinator for Zimbabwe, all representatives from the Republic of Botswana, Malawi, Namibia, South Africa, and the colleagues from SIIA, fellow citizens from the civil society organizations, and colleagues from government. Let me start by expressing our gratitude to the Severe Institute for inviting us to attend this workshop dubbed Zimbabwe Aprm Popular Sensitization for Civil Society, sensitization workshop. This workshop, the first in a series, I believe, takes place following Zimbabwe's voluntary accession to the Aprm in February 2020, thus becoming the 39th AU member to do so. Fellow participants, Zimbabwe's voluntary association clearly demonstrates His Excellency President Mnangagwa's commitment to transparency in governance issues. This is the only way we can ensure enhanced democracy, sustainable peace, stability, economic growth, and development, and the Zimbabwe we want. As we participate in the Aprm, we do so fully cognizant of the following: the citizens' rights as well as obligations as provided for in our Constitution, government's rights and obligations as provided also in our Constitution, and the regional and international treaty to which we are signatories. We also join this process with an open and collaborative mindset and fully confident that this process is not about finger pointing and confrontation, but benchmarking best practices so that we can achieve sustainable economic growth, development, and peace and stability in an environment where all citizens are included, are participating, and enjoy to the fullest their social, economic, political, and other fundamental rights is provided for, as I mentioned before, in our Constitution and the regional, and international treaties to which we are party of. Suffice to point out that Zimbabwe has been reviewed in a number of aspects before through various fora, and the experiences have been very varied. But for the Aprm, this is the first time we are getting involved in the process, and we are grateful to Civil and partners for initiating this important process, although government is yet to finalize the process of setting up its national structures, and we are having the necessary consultation to ensure that those structures are set up. And if I may, at this juncture also mention that we were also going to participate in the first Aprm review summit that was scheduled this February, and it has been postponed to sometime in March. And His Excellency the President will be participating for the first time in that review process. At this juncture, let me also express deep gratitude to the various presenters from our sister republics who are participating in this workshop, sharing their own experiences in the Aprm. In most traditions in our Southern African region, and I believe across the world, when a young lady is about to get into marriage, they normally have what is called a kitchen tea or kitchen party. And during that process, the wife-to-be is counseled, given wise guidance on what to expect. And we are happy that we have presenters from our sister republics who are here to share that experience of the Aprm, how they have done. I can assure you that the lessons learned, advice, and wise counsel provided will be treasured and put to good use in a very open, transparent, and constructive manner as government and its citizens, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders contextualize that advice and chart a uniquely Zimbabwean trajectory, cognizant of our obligations to the Aprm. As government, together with my colleagues, and indeed, I'm sure the Zimbabwean civil service organizations, we look forward to an enlightening workshop which will, provide us with an overview of what to expect in the road ahead. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Faranisi, for those comments, and you stuck to time. And thank you so much for your introductory remarks. I think they've laid down a good platform and a good bed for for the discussions that are going to be taking place. And, you know, I think the one key thing you talked about and you touched on about this being and us coming to this process with an open and collaborative mindset is something that's very key and important. You know, and hence today, we're going to be learning from other experiences, but I think also starting a process of getting insights and different insights from different stakeholders around what they're thinking about with regards to the Africa peer review mechanism process and how Zimbabwe is going to make it work for it in order to ensure that there is transparency, as you said, in governance issues. So just to ensure that we still keep to time, I'm going to now quickly hand over to my colleague, Belinda Chaora, who's going to take us into this next session where we're going to understand a bit more about the Africa peer review mechanism in a nutshell, you know, so background to the Aprm and its structures and so forth. So over to you now, Belinda, to take us through this next session.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Eda, and good morning to everyone else. Good morning to all the civil society partners who are here and everyone who is representing the government of Zimbabwe. Thank you so much for making the time to attend this important collaborative space. So wanting to keep to time, my role for the next 30 minutes is to guide us through a conversation to talk through and just get some idea of what the African peer review mechanism is. So we want to get an overview of what this mechanism is for, the background to it, what are the processes, the structures, the member states, and also just the latest developments that have taken place in this space to date. So like I said, or as Ed has already said, my name is Belinda Chaora. I coordinate the Center for Entrepreneurship and Financial Inclusion for Civio Institute. And with me to talk through this, I've got 3 people. So Stephen Grotz, who is the program head for African Governance and Diplomacy with the South African Institute for International Affairs. And they've come on board as a technical partner to assist civil society organizations get a better understanding of how they can do this process well. We've also got members of the Aprm Secretariat, so Mr. Dalma Jama and Ms. Efigayu Tefera. They are part of the Aprm coordination team for Zimbabwe. And they are going to, in the next few minutes, just talk us through what does this process mean, what's the background to it, and how can civil society and government collaborate effectively through this process. So I would like to do ladies first, but I think, Steve, if you don't mind, I'll take you, if you don't mind going first, and just give us an overview, and then we can take it from there. You've got, if you can keep it to between 5 and 7 minutes, I'd really appreciate it.
That's going to be a challenge, but thank you very much. I'm Steve from the South African Institute of International Affairs. I wanted to show you my t-shirt. It's my APRM t-shirt from the 14th anniversary of the APRM, but in lockdown, it must really love me because it's hugging me tighter than ever before. So, we've been working on the African peer review mechanism for a long time, and I think what's important is to clarify that this is really a partnership with Civio as our coordinators, and we want to help Zimbabwe give birth to its APRM process. So I see myself as a midwife, ready to catch the baby, but in the background. But you know, we'll supply all the sort of technical support. But this is a process that must be owned by Zimbabweans and must be led by Zimbabweans. And it's great to see the enthusiasm around the process. I'm just going to share my screen and I will try and get through it quickly. Share screen, here we go. Okay, so what we're going to try to do between myself, Dalma, and Edgy, can you see that? Can you see it?
Yes, we can, yes. Steve.
Okay, yes. So we're going to try and give you the basics of the APRM in half an hour. So firstly, I think what we're trying to achieve in this work, Damn, okay. What we're trying to achieve today is to inform and educate Zimbabwean civil society and other actors about the APRM and the opportunities it presents. It is a way to get your work out into the public domain, and you're already working on governance issues. This is a great platform to channel them. We're going to learn from 4 other APRM country experiences. We're going to highlight the key entry points for civil society organizations. We hope in the last session to be able to start setting up with Civio, an APRM civil society working group, and explore how to develop a written APRM submission, which we've done in a number of other countries. It's an opportunity for open discussion. And as I said at the end, the executive director of Civio will be taking you through what, taking your questions and what happens next. So just very briefly on my institute, that building is on Wits University campus. It's our head office, but we've been working remotely for about a year. So not too many people go into the building anymore, but SAI has been around for a long time. We were established in 1934. We're an independent, non-governmental think tank on international affairs, and we turn 87 years old this year. We have 4 major programs, the one that I head up on African governance and diplomacy, one on economic diplomacy, one on the governance of resources, and a very vibrant and active youth program. And also actually a program on scenario building and scenario planning and futures thinking. We've worked consistently on APRM since before it was officially launched in 2003. We've been working on it since 2002. A combination of research, analysis, training, consulting to the Secretariat. I'm very privileged to have traveled to about 25 of the APRM country members over the years doing various bits of work. We've sensitized civil society organizations in the early pioneer countries. We worked on a project to revise the APRM questionnaire back in 2011. We worked on a report on bottlenecks to development and on the APRM's expanded mandate, which you'll hear from Dalmar about. And we really want to empower civil society to understand the APRM and take advantage of it. And this project is part of a similar process that we did in Namibia in 2008, as well as Botswana and South Africa, getting all of those countries to civil society to come together and co-create a written submission that feeds into the process. Okay, APRM in a nutshell. As Tendai said, it's a voluntary governance review and promotion tool established in 2003, and it grew out of the thinking around NEPAD and the African Renaissance. It works on a premise that dialogue, peer pressure, diplomacy, and civil society involvement can support and catalyze and accelerate reform. It measures adherence to African and global standards in 4 main thematic areas: democracy and political governance, economic governance and management, corporate governance, and socioeconomic development. It's extremely comprehensive. It's a very big and thorough and robust review, and it's based on a long questionnaire. One of the key phrases is that every review must be, quote, technically competent, credible, and free of political manipulation. I'll repeat that. Technically competent, credible, and free of political manipulation. And this is a kind of mantra of the APRM and something we need to bear in mind. There are a number of institutions that are set up at national and continental level. Dalmar will go into more details there. But there's almost 3 main kinds of reports that come through. The country develops a self-assessment based on their questionnaire. Then a review mission of African experts comes in and interacts with that report and their own research. And eventually President Mnangagwa or whoever replaces him by the time Zimbabwe is finished would be peer reviewed by the other participating heads of state. And then the country has to develop, fund, implement, and report on a national program of action. So far, 40 out of Africa's 55 states have acceded. 22 have had a first review, 3 have had a second review, and 3 have done what is called a targeted review, a much more limited review. I think I'll leave this to Dalmar to go through in detail, but the focal point for Zimbabwe is your new Foreign Affairs Minister, Ambassador Frederick Shava, and he is the liaison point between the national and the continental process. You'll also form a national governing council, a local APRM secretariat, which is often in the ministry of the focal points, and you will appoint technical research institutions to help carry out the research. On the continental level, there's a picture of Ambassador Ombeni Sefue from Tanzania. He's the vice chairman of the panel of eminent persons, and he will be in charge of the Zimbabwe review from the panel side, from the APRM side. There's also the Forum of Heads of State and Government, which is currently chaired by President Ramaphosa, and it's the second of 2 years that he's chairing. There's a committee of focal points. There's the APRM Secretariat, and Dalma, who's joining us today, is the coordinator for Zimbabwe, so we're very grateful to have him with us. And eventually there'll be a country review mission. Let's just try to go down. Sorry, I'm trying to rush this. I'll skip that. I basically covered this. Yeah, I think it's important that it's supposed to be a countrywide process, not just a government one. Thus, the participation of civil society, academics, business, parliament is very important. They may sit on the national governing councils, but also they are encouraged to make written submissions. I think it was Ghana, whose football team is the Black Stars. And when they were doing their APRM process, that every process should be candid, for that's the C, which is open and frank. It should be open. The O is for open. The P is for planned. This takes a lot of planning. The other, so that we're very proud of what we do here. And the R is for robust, that it stands up to scrutiny. Why does the APRM matter? Very quickly, I think it sets new norms of openness, frankness, and transparency. It is unparalleled in its breadth and the sensitive subjects that it covers. It honestly reports and assesses government governance at a point in time. It identifies salient issues and common problems. By the way, we're going to upload these presentations to the website, so you don't have to furiously take notes. It opens up political space and normalizes debate and criticism, which is not always easy in our societies. It serves as an early warning system and supports policy reform. Second reviews allow comparison over time. It strengthens the national brand, and hopefully it convinces others to join. And I think the more countries do it, the more we're able to talk about a map of who's where. I'll give you a couple of seconds to absorb it. Going from the bottom of the key, the ones in white are non-members. So you've got countries like DRC, Madagascar, Central African Republic, South Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea, Libya, Morocco, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, and Togo should actually be in yellow. But those are the countries that have not yet joined. Then you have the yellow countries, which are either new countries like Zimbabwe and Seychelles and Botswana and Namibia, or countries that have been members for a very long time. The map is a bit outdated because the first review has been completed in all of those countries, and Egypt should also be in orange. And second reviews have been done in Kenya, Uganda, and Mozambique. Okay, so now just focusing a little bit on Zimbabwe. As we said, joined in 2020, but not really moved very much. Therefore, the institutions, the personnel, and the plans are still new and not yet set in stone, and therefore can be influenced. Organized civil society can push for an inclusive, transparent institutions and process. You can tell me the key challenges much more than I can tell you, but there are some of them that have come up in Southern African reports, and I think there may be unique ones in Zimbabwe, or maybe not. And what we hope to do is build on our experience to train and empower civil society, and we've developed submissions now of one sort or another with civil society in those 7 countries. This report I was commissioned to do by our Namibian partners, the Institute for Public Policy Research. It's available on the website, and it's a very nice 10-page summary of the APRM. Even though it's written with Namibia in mind, I would recommend it if you're looking for something short to read to get your mind around. But what is this project all about? We want to be supporting civil society and the official process. We're working very closely with the Civio Institute, with the Aprm Secretariat, and indeed, I can take the question mark out, with the government of Zimbabwe. And we held a preliminary workshop at the end of January, and now this workshop today is really about sensitization and experience sharing. We want to help you form a working group. And then what we encourage is that group to select and write up a submission on 12 key issues. Don't tackle the whole questionnaire. You're going to spread yourself too thin. Namibia did 13 issues. South Africa did 9 issues. Botswana did 12 issues. Do them and do them well. We would help with that submission and with a launch and dissemination strategy. And just to let you know that the funder is SIDA, the Swedish International Development Agency, and we're very grateful. I'd like to say thank you to Helena, who is, I think, on the call. They've been very generous supporters of our work. I think I'll leave this for the later discussion, so I'll just skip through that. And just kind of give you an idea of what we were thinking of the provisional timetable. So we've had the January meeting, today is the February meeting. Once the working group gets going, there would be interim meetings. We would hope that the report would be ready by April. It's quite ambitious. Then would be validated by the end of May and hopefully launched by the 29th of June. We can discuss that at the end in the final session. And that's me, thank you. That's where you can get hold of me on my email address. That's my Twitter handle. And we have a very vibrant and engaging Facebook group called #EngageAPRM. We're heading for 700 members on that group all around the continent. It's just a great forum to exchange news and information. But
Belinda, I think we've lost Stephen.
Yeah, it seems like we've lost Stephen.
Okay, all right. No, that's fine. So I'm sure he'll come back at some point. Mr. Dalmajama, please, can I hand over to you? And if you could also give us your insights on how the APRM process is going to be running. And since you are in the Secretariat, you'll be able to give us some idea of the structures that civil society and the government of Zimbabwe will be working with.
Thank you very much, Madam Coordinator, Madam Moderator. I really appreciate this meeting. Good morning. Good morning to colleagues, Ambassador Faranisi, colleagues from the government of Zimbabwe, colleagues from the Civio Institute and SAIA, who have come together with other civil society and NGO groups. Good morning to you. Good morning to our interested parties and colleagues, and Elena from SIDA. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to join you this morning at this meeting, this sensitization meeting. I've had a few other such meetings that I've partnered with other civil society groups, especially in the SADC area. As Stephen mentioned, we did this a few years ago with Namibia. And as a result, I think part of the fact that civil society was so interested in working on governance challenges and reforms in a collaborative manner with government, I think it was able to catalyze the government reform and governance reform that we represent as APRM. In fact, as we are speaking this morning, I had a meeting with the Namibia Secretariat, and we are planning a review mission to take place as soon as possible in the first quarter or early in the second. So just to let you know that this kind of process helps to sensitize, make people aware, and galvanize the process at the national level. So this morning, I'm with my colleague who is part of the coordination team, Ms. Ejigeyu Tefera. Eji and I lead the coordination for at the Continental Secretariat. But as mentioned by Stephen, we also have a lead panel member who leads the entire review. We are very much fortunate to have Ambassador Sefwe, who has been a cabinet secretary for the government of Tanzania. And he's also the vice chair of the APR panel of eminent persons. At some stage, I would imagine in a future meeting at this level, we can invite him on so he can talk about his experiences. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to make a quick presentation on APRM in a nutshell, and so will my colleague, Mr. Farah. When we last met, we had agreed we'd each do about 5 slides. I think since then, I think overnight you'll be surprised that I added quite a few. I'm going to ask you if you can all see the presentation that I put up. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So good morning again. My task this morning is to sensitize you, for those of you who are not as aware about the APRM, to explain to you what we do in a nutshell. So I'll talk a little bit about our focus areas, the functions, our work within the African Union. We're an African Union organ. Universal accession, I think Steve alluded to that. Our member states, governance structures, the review process, and strategic developments. And I realize that time is not on my side. I will be very much touching it in places and not really going into the text. I encourage you to refer to the presentation, which will be available on the website. So the APRM, as colleagues mentioned, was started as part of this NEPAD vision, the NEPAD vision for continental renewal by the NEPAD founding fathers, Bouteflika from Algeria, Obasanjo from Nigeria, Mubarak from Egypt, Abdoulaye Wade from Senegal, and of course, President Mbeki from South Africa. They were the impetus behind this idea. And the idea was very simple. It is you cannot build a new Africa, the African Renaissance, without working on the foundations. And the foundations is good governance. So the idea was to have an African-owned and led self-assessment process where we sit together and say, how can we improve? What are our common standards? How do we encourage?
Password, but the way you send, can we have you?
I don't know if colleagues can hear me.
Sorry, just to remind everyone, please, may you make sure your mics are on mute? And also to our host, please, can you feel free to mute anyone else besides Mr. Jama, who might have their mics on at the moment?
Thank you, moderator. So this is an African-owned and led process where we look at common standards, because as you know, the wealth creator, our member states have told us, is encouraging the private sector. And you can only do that through common governance standards and a common understanding of what good governance is. So we at the APRM, as part of the AGA, the African Governance Architecture, are working to implement the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance in full respect for principles of human rights, the rule of law, as well as the eventual realization of the social economic development of our continent as part of Agenda 2063. APRM, I should mention, was revitalized over the last 5 years until the end of last year. We, as a result of improvements in how we do things and in confidence of our AU member states, we have been given an expanded mandate that Stephen talks about. At the moment, through the Kagame Reforms in 2017, we are now tracking implementation and monitoring key governance areas on the continent through reports such as the Africa Governance Report, where we lead the Africa Governance Architecture in producing. And we've completed so far 2 reports, the 2019 Africa Governance Report and the 2021 Africa Governance Report. And the 2021 is on Africa future scenarios planning until 2063, looking at things as if our member states decide on a certain trajectory, how will it succeed? So we have several scenarios. It's a very exciting report. I encourage colleagues who are in this meeting to please reach out and look for this report. It's a fantastic report. As well as in the expanded mandate, we have now we advise our member states on ratings. We produced our first continental ratings report last year, and now we're completing the second one. We also look at working with the African Peace and Security Architecture on using our tool, our governance tool, the reports that we produce, as early warnings for conflict prevention on the continent. I'm trying to go to the next slide. I don't know if, yeah. So these are our 4 thematic areas. democracy and political governance, economic governance and management, corporate governance, and socioeconomic development. APRM functions in a nutshell. There are about 10 main areas that we work in. We promote and facilitate self-monitoring and evaluation by our member states, led by governments, but of course, that is in collaboration with the private sector and civil society, which you represent. We monitor, evaluate, and track key implementations of governance reports on the continent, including our Africa Governance Report for the eventual realization of AU Agenda 2063. We prepare the Africa Governance Report in collaboration with the AGA platform. The AGA platform, for those of you who are not aware, is the Africa Governance Architecture Platform. It includes key continental organs, such as the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the African Commission on the African Court, the Pan-African Parliament, etc. We serve as a platform for sharing best practices at national, regional, and continental level. We encourage participating states to implement their national programs of action. We integrate objectives of APRM into national plans, which is why it's so critical that the work is mainly done at the national level. We create national structures. We work with our member states, including Zimbabwe, in creating really strong and durable national structures that have budgets and that can implement their national plans. And we integrate the objectives of our governance reforms into national plans, as well as work with the regional economic communities such as SADC and regional development bodies. We provide support to member states in the field of credit ratings. We work in continental early warning systems, and we encourage participating states to implement elements of the African Charter on Democracy and elections. So we promote democracy and good governance on the continent. This, in a nutshell, are our functions. So the goal of APRM, if I can reiterate, is to promote good governance in Africa by encouraging our member states to have common policies and practices that can lead to strong political stability, economic growth, and accelerated sub-regional and continental integration for wealth creation and socioeconomic development. I mentioned already the Kagame Reforms, which are part of the expanded mandate, which confer to APRM the mandate to track all implementation and evaluation of the continent's key governance areas, especially in Aspiration 3 of Agenda 2063 on an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law, and Aspiration 4 on a peaceful and secure Africa. In terms of universal accession, I won't go too much into it, just to let you know that we have managed to now have 40 member states of the AU part of us. And these are states that are ready to work and implement good governance reforms. DRC is set to exceed in March, which will lead us to 22 to 41. As mentioned by His Excellency Ambassador Faranisi, Zimbabwe and Seychelles joined as the 39th and 40th just last year. And this is our representation. The countries that are in red have completed 2 review reports each. The countries, if you can see it, that are in green have completed reviews, 1 review at least. Namibia, I should mention, I haven't highlighted it. Namibia has completed a targeted review on youth unemployment. Just last year, it was peer reviewed because that was a burning issue they wanted to discuss among all stakeholders in the country. And it will be launched this year at the same time as a full review to be done in Namibia in the first half of this year. So as a result, we have, as mentioned, 40 member states with DRC set to join this year. 23 countries have completed first generation reviews. 3 countries have completed second generation reviews. This, in a nutshell, is our architecture. We have the continental layer, and it was mentioned by Steve, so I'll quickly go over it, and the national layer. And you will see that the national layer is comparative to the continental. We are led by the APR Forum of Heads of State at the continental level. A member of the APR Forum is the President of Zimbabwe, who was also, he's the one who leads the national level as well. In the same way, we have a panel of eminent persons, which guarantees the technical credibility of the reviews that we do. At the member state level, at the Zimbabwe level, a national governing council will do the same thing. and it would include representatives from civil society, and EDGI, my colleague, will speak about that a little bit. And then we also have national secretariat at the national level and a continental secretariat, which I represent with EDGI here today at the continental level. We have strategic partners who go on our reviews and work with us on making sure that the foundation of our reports are credible, using good data that all can agree on, that will allow us to plan for future growth, future improvements. At the national level, you have research institutions that assist in the same manner with completing self-assessment reports. And I should mention at this stage that the self-assessment report is the foundation of our review process. Nobody at the continental level can come to Zimbabwe and say, this is what's happening. What we do is we request the Zimbabweans themselves, in all their glory, the whole nation, not just the government, but civil society and the private sector, to work together and complete a self-assessment report, which is then verified, augmented where necessary, highlighted, and finalized by a continental team led by the panel of eminent persons. That, in a nutshell, I would say, is our process. So I encourage you to take a look at this presentation later on. It goes into the details of what we exactly look at. Now that you are joining the APRM as a community, you should now understand the lingo, because whenever you join a community, there is a language. And when APRM languages, we speak in acronyms. When we say DPG, we're talking about democracy and political governance. EGM, economic governance and management. CG, corporate governance, and SED, socioeconomic development. We examine all of these registers and work together with government, civil society, and the private sector in identifying key reforms that can improve governance at the member state level, and indeed at the local level as well. Because our review teams don't just stay in the capital, they go to the regions as well, and they look at governance of other local structures, including municipalities, in some member states you have counties, etc. So with this next section, dear colleagues, because of the time constraints, I encourage you to take a look at it. We talk about the different types of reviews. We talk about establishment of national structures and the timeline for the country review process. We talk about how we cook the country self-assessment report. We sit around the pot, we bring in our principles, and we say inclusive participation, technically competent facts that we put on the table, national ownership and leadership, free from political manipulation. We have our normative instrument, the questionnaire. We bring in research methods that we assist you in developing, and we train and work with you, including, but of course, we work with your national statistical associations, teams, which are well aware of this. So for example, in Namibia, we've brought in the National Statistical Agency to work with the team in completing a self-assessment report. And then as a result, our final cooked product is the self-assessment report, which acts as the basis for a country review team to come in, verify, and finalize a country review report that's then put in, submitted to the heads of state in their annual meeting, where they peer review, discuss with their peer, discuss it frankly in a closed session, and talk about how this can be achieved, the reforms that we'd like. So that is the country self-assessment report pictorially. And the final output of the review is not just the country review report, but a national program of action, which presents clear time-bound commitments on governance priorities over the medium term. And it is then integrated into the existing national development plans. We work with the national planning authorities, our focal points, to make sure that this is done in a nice way, such that it is costed and implemented. And every year, the member state then reports back after peer review on where they are with the national program of action before we start a second review, as Steve mentioned, which can then re-examine some of these registers and say, yes, here we did improve. Here there was no improvement. What happened? Was it an implementation issue? So these are the kind of discussions we have at our level. Dear colleagues, at this moment, I will now go into a little bit of the APRM strategic developments. Our new strategic plan is the strategic plan for 2020 to 2024, which is approved by the AU Assembly, the APR Forum and the AU Assembly in February last year. And we focus on governance as a tool for regional integration within the AU. We have 4 areas that we look at. The first one is the primary one where we operate. It's governance reviews and assessments. It's the country review reports. It's targeted review reports. It's the assessment for the Africa governance report. It's national governance reports, which I'll talk about a little later. And then the other 3 key priority areas are complementing it, making it better. So we have our research teams, our monitoring and evaluation teams. We have teams that are looking at capacity development, even in our national secretariats. And then we have the advocacy and communication teams, which are out there giving the message on governance reforms. These are selected key APRM initiatives over the last year. I mentioned about 2 years ago, the AU Assembly decided that in addition to the Africa Governance Report, APRM now across all 55 AU member states should develop with member states national governance reporting. The first pilot national governance report is being completed as we speak for Uganda. We're also tracking, as I mentioned earlier, the governance-related aspects of Agenda 2063 and the UN SDGs 2030. So for 2063, it's aspirations 3 and 4 mainly. For SDGs, it's the SDG 16. We, as I mentioned, produce every 2 years the Africa Governance Report. We have an annual methodology forum, which colleagues who are even sitting in this meeting now can attend in the future, which looks at the tools, the research, the methodologies across the continent. They are compared. All the national secretariats are represented. All the national governing councils are represented, and they work together to improve as brothers and sisters the way we do things, our research processes. We also have an annual governance seminar series where we work with leading research institutions across the continent in governance topics that might be almost like a leading edge in terms of how we do things. We have a Africa Governance Atlas. We have the Africa Governance Campus, which we are starting, which will offer courses that will assist our member states. We're supporting member states on international credit rating agencies, and we also have a team that's working on governance of state-owned enterprises. There is the SOE network, the State-Owned Enterprises Network, which was started. They had an annual meeting in Mauritius 2 years ago. They're having another meeting this year. They look at topical issues because, as you know, for our member states, our governments, we have been approached and told that state-owned enterprises are a leading cost element for our member states. And how can we help them have better governance? That's where the governance of state-owned enterprises comes in. I mentioned already about the NGRs. I encourage you to take a look at it. The National Governance Report is the future for us because eventually we foresee it as being able to give the information that will be utilized in the self-assessment reports. So it will make the life easier for our member states. If every year a member state produces a National Governance Report, that sort of takes away the need to continually start structures and processes for producing a self-assessment report every 3 or 4 years, as in the ordinary APRM process. So we're excited about this. And APRM is providing, as I mentioned, technical support to all AU member states to produce their own national governance reports. Achievements so far: at the 2020 summit, we had 2 governance peer reviews, a full review for Egypt and a targeted review on youth unemployment. At the next summit, I should mention, the one in March that was mentioned by Ambassador Faranisi, we have about 6 peer reviews scheduled, including the full governance peer review for Liberia, a targeted peer review for Sierra Leone on the COVID response and health governance, targeted reviews of Zambia. I think Susan is here. Welcome, Susan, from the Zambia Secretariat. She might speak about that a little bit, but we did targeted reviews on tourism and mineral resource governance for Zambia, a targeted review on fiscal decentralization in Djibouti. We will also do a progress report peer review for Mozambique and a progress report peer review for Kenya. So it's a tough schedule. We have 3 hours to go through a lot. Last year, we also launched a preliminary governance assessment on policy responses to the COVID-19 crisis. We revised our guidelines for how we complete our reviews, taking into account the virtual nature of the work that a lot of it must be done virtually since the COVID-19 pandemic hit us last year. And I also already mentioned that the African Governance Report has been tabled for consideration by the next AU Assembly. So colleagues, thank you so much for your kindness. I hope I did not abuse the time that you've given me. With permission, moderator, my colleague Eji also has now a presentation where we will focus on where we are within SADC, because Eji is the regional coordinator for Southern Africa, as well as the CSOs, what our work specifically with civil society entails. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. So yes, I think that's fine. Your presentation was really well detailed, and I think it's given everybody who's present some idea of how important the African peer review mechanism is. And just before AG starts to speak, I would just like to remind you that we will have questions, so please feel free to post your questions in the chat function of the Zoom platform. And then we will also be hosting a poll. This is like an anonymous poll. It won't take your names and your email addresses. We just want to get an idea of what you think are the key issues that Zimbabwe needs to address going forward. And someone else in the chat was asking about how other countries have undertaken their processes. There will be time in the program later on for that. But for now, please feel free to post your questions in the chat function. And a reminder, of course, to keep your mics on mute if you're not presenting. Reggie, please go for it.
Good morning. Thank you, Belinda. Good morning to everyone who has joined this webinar. My name is Jugaya Tapara. I am from the Aprm Continental Secretariat. And also I have a responsibility of coordinating the Southern African member state countries. I will continue, my presentation will be a continuation of what has been already said by my colleagues Steve and Dalmar, and I will just be focusing on a little bit of landscape to show you the status of Aprm in SADC countries, as well as the CSO's involvement in the Aprm. I don't want to repeat what has already been said. The Aprm mechanism has been in existence for the past 18 years. And in these past 18 years, the Aprm has registered quite a significant growth in terms of its membership. It started by just 6 members. Today we have about 14 member states. And in the SADC region, we have, out of the 16 member states, we have about 12 countries who are Aprm member states, and the other 4, which is Comoros, Democratic Republic of Congo, Eswatini, and Madagascar, are non-members. But DRC is in the process of joining the Aprm and expected to join the mechanism on the 30th Aprm forum, which is now scheduled to take place on the 25th of March 2021. And in terms of reviews, about 7 countries in SADC have gone through the full country review process. Namibia has done a targeted review on youth unemployment, so that's already mentioned by Dalmar, and it's currently completing full review. When I come to the involvement of Csos in the Aprm process, Csos are considered as an integral part of the Aprm process, both at national and at continental level. This is because of the importance of Csos in enhancing accountability, transparency, and good governance in the continent. And the fact that also the Csos exist outside of the state apparatus provide that it contributes positively to influence the mechanism's outcomes towards the different burning national challenge. And given this importance, the Aprm strategic plan also prioritizes civil society participation in the Aprm mechanism, and consider it as one of the critical success factors. The same with the AU. The AU also consider Csos as the key elements and in securing economic and the social prosperity, and also to the achievement of the Agenda 2063 and Agenda 2030, which is the UN United Nations Agenda 2030. So the CSO's participation in the APRM process they have been participating in different means and ways, such as providing submissions, reports, and research on governance challenge, and proposed reforms to representatives on the National Governing Council. My colleague Dalmar has mentioned that one of the national structures in the APRM structure is the National Governing Council, which is mainly constituted from the private sector, the civil society, and the government. So the CSOs can have their say through their representative in the APRM process in this National Governing Council. So the CSOs do improve accountability and the implementation of governance frameworks by contributing to the APRM review. And if you look at the cycle during the preparation, and then the actual review, as well as after the review cycle has been completed. CSOs can contribute to the consultation with the national and continental structures and the translation of APRM objectives, principles, and policies into actionable activities. And once the review process has been completed, the CSOs also can contribute to the support to provide advocacy and communication efforts in popularizing the review report findings. Also follow up on the implementation of the recommendations, as well as the national program of action, which are considered as the key outcomes of the APRM review process. Yes, CSOs has been considered as part and parcel of the APRM process, but still there is a gap, in utilizing that full potential the CSOs can offer to the APRM process. And we also believe that more needs to be done to ensure that CSOs take full advantage of this process, to influence policies and advocate, for the best outcomes of good governance. As a reference, there is one handbook that has been prepared by Aprm and our strategic partner, who is the UNECA. I encourage participants, if they can Google, or I can share that report. It's available online, but I can also share this handbook just to give you a little bit more detail insights into how the CSOs can involve and participate and also contribute to the APRM work. And at continental level, the APRM Secretariat is also working with the various CSOs, at the regional and international level. Institutions such as the ECOSOC and the African Youth Invoice, we trying to engage them and participate in their forum, and also, we popularize outcomes of our review process in those platforms, and we continue to engage with the CSOs at the continental level and regional level. That's all I wanted to say for this morning. If there are questions and comments, feel free to read them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eji. So I think right now I'd like to just bring your attention for yourself and Dalma to some of the questions that have come through on the chat. So some of them might be best answered later. I think the first one says, how seriously does the AU take the APRM, given that it is voluntary? And having done a country report, what shape or form has advocacy taken in countries where they've worked on the same report? I think maybe you can answer the first half of the question, how seriously does AU take the APRM process? The second half, I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to answer that in the later sections. So how seriously does the AU take the APRM process, given that it is a voluntary process? And then is the APRM a binding commitment, or is it just ticking boxes? That's another question that has come through. And then the other questions about country challenges and experiences, I think we'll have time for that later. So just the voluntary process, is it a binding commitment? and how seriously does AU take that? So between yourself and Dalma, maybe one of you could answer those questions.
Can I start, Dalma?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah, with your permission.
Very much. Thank you, dear participant, for these wonderful questions. Indeed, the APRM is a voluntary process, but the voluntary nature of the APRM stops the moment countries accede to it and they sign the Memorandum of Understanding at the Heads of State Forum. Then it will become mandatory. And once the countries are acceded, there are prerequisites to start the process of review, and once the review is completed, there is also responsibility. It's also a responsibility of the government to report back and tell their colleagues at the forum in terms of the implementation of the recommendations in the national program of action. So yes, it is a voluntary process until the level of accession. Once member states have acceded, then the voluntary nature stopped and it becomes a mandatory process. And I think that explains, or that answers the voluntary nature question. Dalma, you can attempt to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moderator, with your permission.
Yes, Dalma, it's fine. Please go for it.
Thank you kindly. Thank you, Edgy. I think Edgy really covered most of what I wanted to cover, but just to give you all, the APRM, I think in terms of how seriously does the AU take the APRM process? Over the last few years, we have been very much recognized at the AU level. We've had what Steve referred to a little bit, but I referred to in my presentation as the expanded mandate, and it has several, I would say, key developments. The fact that we are now to lead the AU in producing national governance reports. The fact that we are now to assist the African peace and security architecture in dealing with the violence and conflict, and using our reports, if done properly, as early warning indication for potential conflict. So that's also very much key, and we take it seriously. The fact that we've been asked to assist member states in advisories for credit ratings, that's also, I would say, a key development. All of these to show you, and I could go into a few more, the Africa Governance Report, the fact that we are now also doing voluntary national reviews of SDGs. We have a team that I think is either just completed or is completing a workshop on voluntary national reviews of the UN Agenda 2030 in Djibouti. So they were there this week, not still there. So just to let you know that it's the AU that has come to us and has given us all these expanded mandate, because that is a measure of the confidence they have in the APRM as a tool to improve governance. So just to let you know, that's how I see it. And another factor that shows the confidence is that our budget used to be voluntary.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just a reminder to our host, please can you mute mics? And to everybody who is in the presentation, please can you mute your mic if you're not speaking?
Linda, the person whose mic is on is Tongosai. I'm struggling to mute the mic, so can they please just mute the mic on their side? Thank you.
Moderator,
please can you mute your mic, please? Okay. All right. Dalma, sorry about that. If you can continue.
Thank you, moderator. So I think I was wrapping up that, just to say that another area of confidence that we can see is that the APRM budget used to be voluntarily from voluntary contributions, from contributions by the member states. So once they joined, it became mandatory. Each member state used to provide a certain amount of funds. But as of 2019, we have been fully integrated into the AU statutory budget from Addis Ababa. So this is another mark of confidence in the work that we, as the mechanism, when I say we, I include all of our national secretariats or of our national function governing councils, because this is very much a decentralized working body of the AU. And we are here to, as I said earlier, work on common standards, and very much I would say the AU takes us seriously, and each member state, there are varying, I would say, levels of commitment. But in general, I can say that the commitment level has risen to the occasion. As I mentioned to you, we're having 6 peer reviews, including 2 progress report peer reviews on March the 25th. This is a mark of the level of seriousness that our heads of state are doing, are giving the mechanism. The mechanism is a platform for them to discuss serious common issues. There are a lot of common cross-cutting issues, whether it's land, whether it's climate change, whether it's the COVID-19 crisis. These are all common governance-related challenges that our member states would like and do discuss in a closed session and talk about how they can better perform for their member states. And that's what we are there for as a community. And welcome to the community, to colleagues who are here.
Thank you so much, Delma. And then I've just got 2 more questions. I'm also quite aware that we're behind time. So for yourself and Effie, the last 2 questions that I have, if we could try to answer them within the next 4 minutes so that I can hand over to the next session by maybe about 15:15. So I know you've touched on it already, but just to give an overview of what the key elements are to ensure that national structures are fully operationalized and are engaged effectively in the continental review process. So that's the first question. And then the second one, I think this was touched on by Steve, but maybe if you could just, in a one line, how can CSOs contribute towards the APRM? Is there a report that non-state actors can contribute to? Maybe if you can just answer those questions for the people who might have missed Steve's presentation at the beginning. If you could do one-liners, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a little difficult, but I don't know if Edgy wants to say something, moderator, before I.
Either you see it here, planner, the assigned task, this way you get. So what I'll do is
Haji, please turn off your mic. Thank you. And then Edgy, if you could tackle any one of the 2 questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll be very brief. I'll try to answer the question, what are the key elements needed to ensure the national structures are fully operationalized and engaged effectively in the APRM continental process? The key element to constitute national structure is that the inclusivity nature of constituting especially the national governing institution. Once that is in place, then that institution or that council will ensure that the review process is competent, credible, and it's free from any political manipulation. So that is the key for constituting the national structures. So we expect it to be inclusive and all stakeholders are represented in the national governing council. The other issue, which is always a big issue in operationalizing the APRM at national level, is budget. So budgetary provisions from government to make sure that all the necessary say the stationary office or other equipment to run the work of the national governing council as well as the national secretariat efficiently. I'll hand over the floor to Dalma.
With your permission, moderator.
Yes, please.
So thank you very much to my sister, Edgy. So colleagues, in terms of the question is how can CSOs contribute to the APRM? I would say there are a few, there are at least 2 or 3. One is right now at the beginning of the process to start preliminary discussions with the government of Zimbabwe on representation on the National Governing Council. So this requires an element of thought because there is this balance between participation and representation. Because if you have thousands of civil society organizations in a member state like Zimbabwe, how do you make sure that all sectors are represented? So in that case, you might have an umbrella association that would primarily interface at the National Governing Council. Or you might decide that there will be sectoral representatives. And this is how we will be advising at the Continental Secretariat, our member state structures, is to say, look at it maybe at sectorally to say there must be, we recommend, because of course it's a sovereign decision. We recommend that you have civil society organizations from the trade unions, from the disabled structures, women's groups, religious groups maybe, or traditional authorities. So we have a guidelines on this that we will share with the member states and that we can share also with this body. Just so you are aware that there are guidelines, it's not a must. Member states will of course absorb these and say, this has worked in Namibia, or this has worked in Mauritius, or this has worked in Ghana. Maybe we will do it this way. And so there are guidelines on representation of NGCs at the level. So that's the formal. But also at other levels, even if a certain civil society organization is not represented on the council, it can make sure that its voice is heard through submissions to the NGC to make sure that any challenges that are that they believe should be addressed are looked at through a submission. And then, of course, through the process. I think Edgy went a little bit into the process. There's this self-assessment report. So make sure that the issues that you're passionate about are made available to the technical research institutions who are generally academic or think tanks that are chosen by the government to complete the self-assessment report. So these think tanks, if it's in democracy and political governance, if it's in the area of socioeconomic development, you can send your submissions to them, including research such as this proposal, what Namibia did, and I think where you are working towards in this forum, which is maybe some kind of a civil society submission to the eventual self-assessment report on these are the 5 or 6 or 7 or however many deep challenges that we as civil society feel are important for Zimbabwe, and then you submit it to the self-assessment, to the National Governing Council, so that it's used as a basis for collecting the national voices that are then summarized in the self-assessment report. So that's during the process. And then as we verify, we bring in a continental team to verify the self-assessment report and write the final review report. Make sure you make yourselves available for the validation meetings, for the meetings with the review team, so that again, that's a third level of participation. And then finally, after the review report is peer reviewed and published, you need to make sure that you work with the government in implementation, in making sure that this is not just an academic exercise with a report sitting on a shelf somewhere, that you make it a living document, which is followed up and implemented. And if there are any gaps or there is lack of funding, that you work together in making sure that that gap is addressed. I'm sorry you said a one-liner, Madam Moderator. I have failed you again.
No, it's fine. We as panelists, we had agreed that your contributions were quite important. So we have made Simon available for that. So we unfortunately, but because Zimbabwe is doing this for the first time, we just felt that it was really important to get your insight into how this process works and make sure everyone is aware of that. So the last thing that I will ask us to do as part of this phase of the timetable of the program is if you please wouldn't mind turning on your videos. We'd just like to take a photo of everybody who's present. This is our way of remembering so if you don't mind, please turn on your videos, everybody, and then we can do a screenshot. I'm not sure whether we need to, if I should do that on my end, or is there someone who can help me just to make sure I do that properly? Okay.
Linda, I can assist with that.
Okay, thank you so much, Luanda. Okay. Do you want us to do a cheese, or is this fine?
I'll leave that up to you, Madam Moderator. I'll just take the picture. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think I'm sure this is fine. Yeah, I'm sure this is fine. I know some people don't have their videos on, but it's fine. I know it's hard when you're online not everybody comes dressed and ready for a meeting online. So I quite understand. But for those who are able to, please do turn on your videos. Luanda, let me know when you've managed to capture all the pages.
Okay, I'm going to page 2 now.
Page 2, people, please look happy. Thank
now
you.
Page 3.
Okay, thank you.
Where some of us leave, page 3, the last one.
Thank you.
Yes. You've been holding a smile for 3 minutes.
I've managed to capture everybody. Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, everybody. Feel free to turn your videos off again if you'd like. I'd like to hand over now to the next phase of our program. Eda, you can take it from here. My apologies once again for the overshooting the time, but I'm sure you can tell this was quite important. So Eda, I'll hand over back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Belinda. Thank you so much to Dalma and Eji. I think, that this session was quite important. And as you mentioned, Belinda, that since this is the first time that Zimbabwe is kind of interacting with this process, it was good to also, get a clear foundation and a good foundation around what the Aprm entails. So we'll find a way to catch up and make up some time. But now that we've got a bit of an understanding just broadly of the Aprm process, we're going to move on now to hear from experiences within the region and different countries who, and lessons from the continent about how they've undertaken the Aprm process in their respective countries. So we're going to hear from colleagues so we're also going to hear from colleagues from Zambia, Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa. And just quickly, I forgot to also thank Steve for his inputs in the last session as well. So thank you as well, Steve, for your inputs. So I'm going to hand over now to Natsai. So over to you to take us through the session around the lessons from the continent.
Awesome. Thanks, Eda. Morning, everyone. My name is Natai from Severe Institute. So I'm going to be chairing, I think, one of the most important sections or sessions of this particular workshop. So here we have lessons from the continent. So we're going to be learning from the different peers who have actually undergone this Aprm process. So we have 4 individuals who are representing the different partner organizations around the Aprm. So we will have first Ms. Susan Mwape from Zambia, and she's representing the CSOs from Zambia. I think, Susan, you can go first, and then I'll introduce the others as you go. And then we will have, I think, about 20 minutes of a question and answer segment after each presenter presents. And each presenter will have about 10 minutes to make a presentation. So I think what we're hoping to get from this session mainly, especially as Zimbabwe, are the lessons that you, the different countries have gone through in respect of the Aprm process. We also need to know the best practices, the risks, the challenges that you have gone through. So I think having a deep understanding of your personal experiences in the process will really help us as we try to tackle this initiative. Thanks. Over to you, Susan. Susan, are you on the call? Awesome. Hi, Susan. You can take it.
Susan, if you could just unmute your mic.
Sorry, I was muted.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. You can have a go. So you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Natai.
Great.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for having me on the session. I'd like to express my gratitude to the conveners of this meeting, Sibo and Saya. And I also want to acknowledge the presence of colleagues from the Aprm Secretariat, Dilma. I've seen a number of people from the Secretariat and colleagues from the region and Zimbabwe and beyond. I want to share our experiences as civil society from Zambia and how our Aprm journey was undertaken as civil society. So Zambia acceded to the APRM in January 2006. And we went through so many processes and finally only got reviewed in 2013. It took us about 7 years to go through the process. And from the time that we acceded until the time we got reviewed, we had 3 different heads of state that managed the APRM. The first one had died. Then we had a by-election, there was a new president. Then we had general elections, and then there was a new president. So we had 3 presidents that went through the process, and that is partly why it took a very long time. And because Zimbabwe is going through this process for the first time, I thought it's important to highlight that one of the reasons that we took so long was because in the middle of the process, we had about 2 elections, 2 general elections, and elections are not a great environment for the APRM. So the APRM itself tries to protect the process from over-politicization, and we all know what happens in any given country when you have an election period or an election going on. Having said that, we went through our first review, which was the general review, from 2006 up to 2013. And then in 2019, like Delma mentioned in his presentation, we were one of the, I think we were the second country that underwent a targeted review. And we were focusing on 2 areas, mineral resources and tourism. So far, we are yet to launch the 2 reports. Hopefully we'll do it in March during the March summit. So I'm speaking from the civil society's perspective. We were one of the countries in Africa that created a civil society APRM with the, as soon as the country acceded to the APRM process. And this was because we felt it would be very important to have complete focus on the APRM as opposed to having individual CSOs engaging with the process, because we realized at an early stage that the APRM was more or less a full-time job and needed complete attention as other CSOs did their day-to-day work. And so the CSOs came together and created what was known as a civil society APRM Secretariat. And that Secretariat had the sole responsibility of ensuring that they played the role of liaison between civil society and the government. And so that Secretariat convened meetings for CSOs, ensured that CSOs engaged with the overall national processes, and also that we also disseminated that information to our constituents as civil society. So from the time that we acceded in 2006, we too as civil society had an information session that was organized by SAIA, and that to a large extent shaped how we engaged with the process. With SAIA having had been in the game and following the APRM from inception, we had a lot of information and knowledge from other countries that they had engaged with. And so that helped us to understand how other countries had done it, what our expectations were. And we relied a lot on a document that SAIA had produced, a checklist for civil society on how to engage with the APRM. We also looked at some of their other documentations, like the checklist for the NGCs, that also showed us what the role of the NGC was and all the other players. And through that, after establishing the Secretariat, we're able to go into a lot of sensitization to raise awareness around this process, not just to civil society, but to citizens as well. And how we did this was, upon a session, there was an information session that was organized by the Continental Secretariat, where they told us what to expect. So we went flat out using the CSO networks to raise awareness, to let people know that we were part of this process and what our expectations were and what they were supposed to do to participate in this. We went on to engage in some advocacy as and when it was needed with civil society. And I can, to a large extent, say civil society played a very critical role in the whole APRM process of Zambia, because the Secretariat was established before the NGC was appointed. So one of the first things we did after sensitizing people was to write to the focal point ministry and advise them on potential people that could sit on the National Governing Council. Now, during the Continental Secretariat's information session, the first advance mission that was undertaken, one of the agreements that we had made was that the National Governing Council should have a tripartite arrangement in terms of representation. What that meant was that we wanted all sectors represented. We wanted equal numbers of people to represent civil society, the corporate sector, and government. Meaning if we're going to have 9 members, 3 should come from CSOs, 3 from the government, 3 from the corporate sector. And we felt that that would enable us to have a uniform engagement in line with the APRM thematic areas. So we wrote a letter, and a number of people and organizations that we recommended were actually picked and included on the National Governing Council. And one of the things that was actually an achievement for us was that all the 3 chairs of the National Governing Council were drawn from the civil society. So whoever was the chair appointed as chairperson were drawn from civil society, except for now when we have a retired general who's our current National Governing Council chairperson. We ensured that civil society participated in all the processes that took place when we had the advanced mission under Dr. Machel. We also had a number of eminent persons, but we made sure that civil society was present, that civil society was speaking the same language, that we consulted before we engaged with these processes. We engaged with the ministry, the focal point ministry, we engaged with the eminent persons, we engaged with the country review mission, and more importantly, we also created our own civil society submission. And in that submission, we focused on the 4 key thematic areas of the APRM. And in focusing on those, we realized that there were certain areas, or there were certain thematic areas that we had strengths in, and there were certain thematic areas that were not so strong in. So we focused on the areas that we're strong in, and those are the areas where we made submissions. That submission was given to the focal point ministry, to the NGC, and also to the country review mission. And I'm proud to say that most of the issues that we highlighted in those in the CSO submission were actually taken on board and made it to the national report, the final report. And the submission was made again with the help of SAYA, who provided us with technical support, and the civil society from Zambia made put in the content, looked at the evidence that we had in terms of the work that we're doing. So we did not have to reinvent the wheel. We looked at the areas within which civil society was working and said, okay, so you work in the area of gender. Gender is a cross-cutting issue. What are the issues in that area that affect issues of land, for example, of the constitution, etc.? And that is how we built our submission. I'll try not to go into too many details around that, but some of the lessons that we learned. Okay, so before I get to the lessons, I want to also say that other than just suggesting or not, suggesting people that would sit on the governing council, we also suggested institutions that could be appointed as technical research institutions, and we continuously played that role. So between government and civil society, we had that rapport. But I also want to make it clear here that at the time that we acceded to the APRM in 2006, Zambia was having its constitutional review process, and civil society and government were not in good books with each other. We had quite an acrimonious relationship in the sense that civil society was not happy with the approach that the government had taken in the constitutional review process. And so a lot of words had been flown left, right, and center. And then when the APRM came on board, the focal point ministry that was appointed to be focal point was the same ministry that was handling the constitution making process. So already you can see the challenge that we're having there. We had a lot of mistrust. We had a lot of, not such great blood, but in the process, we got to learn. And as I get to the lesson, we realized that the APRM gave us an opportunity to mend some of those relationships, to build that trust and for us to be able to work together. And that was mostly based on the guidelines and the requirements of the APRM and how that goes, but I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So coming back to the lessons that we learned, some of the challenges that we had was the uneven engagement of institutions, especially in the area of corporate governance and economic governance. For us in Zambia, corporate governance, there were not so many institutions working in that area. And even civil society itself was not focusing so much on that area. So it was a bit of a challenge, and sometimes people were left behind. So we had to make an active effort to ensure that we brought those people on board so that their issues too would be carried on board and represented in the final report. And then we also observed that whilst the APRM spoke about participation of youth and persons with disabilities, There was a lot of silence in that area, but we were fortunate that we had a number of organizations in Zambia that work in that area, and we made sure that we submitted that in our reports. Something that I think should be commended is that the Continental Aprm Secretariat has made a lot of strides in this area. And right now, I am aware that the Continental Secretariat is working on strengthening the parameters of use within the national report. I would like to also acknowledge my colleague Lennon, who heads the youth desk at the Secretariat. Maybe he will talk about this in detail, but this is something that I think you will not experience at this point in the process. Again, some of our lessons were also the fact that government viewed CSOs with divergent views as challengers, and they perceived us as people who were more confrontational, but because of the nature of the APRM, were able to engage. If there was a process that the government was really transparent in, I would say it was the APRM process. They were very transparent in how they engaged with the process based on the guidelines. We were able to tell who was coming from there, from the appointment of NGCs, CSOs sitting on there, the engagement of technical research institutions, the way the country self-assessment report was formulated, the validation, the coming of the country review mission, until the point at which the report itself was produced. Civil society was part and parcel of the process every step of the way, because one, that is a prerequisite within the APRM guidelines, but secondly, CSOs were very proactive. So for us, other than the national processes that took place, when the country review mission came in, we made sure we took, we got a copy of the roadmap. We took stock of where they were going, and we made sure that all the CSOs that were in those provinces, no matter how far they were, they went to participate and talk to the country review mission, shared their views. And when we submitted our report, we actually were delighted to hear from our lead panelist for the main review, who was Professor Amos Sawyer at the time. He wrote to us to thank us for our input and our participation in the entire process, because everywhere the review mission went, they met with civil society, and civil society knew what they were talking about, and they shared their views. I think what makes the APRM worthwhile really is the accessibility of the whole process. One of the challenges that we faced most was awareness of the process at the beginning for citizens. So what we tried to do was, within our sensitization, we tried to, as much as possible, simplify the process. So when we went to places and we told people about the African peer review mechanism, they could not assimilate it. Even civil society itself could not assimilate it. But when we began to simplify it and break it down and bring it to the language that people understood, if you talked about service delivery, about issues of democracy, of accountability, of transparency, people began to talk. So even as Zimbabwe begins to engage with this process, I would encourage CSOs to be as simple as possible with this process in trying to get people to understand it, because for as long as you make it technical, people cannot engage. But when you simplify it, they begin to engage in ways that you'll be surprised. We were able to influence the process all the way. I think I have talked about this. And I believe that the APRM has the potential, if harnessed properly, to win collectively, not just for Zimbabwe, but for the rest of Africa. So we all have to play our part. And finally, so my advice to CSOs would be that, please, you need to collaborate. Collaboration and unity is key in this process. That safeguards you from isolation tactics, because when you speak as one voice, when you work as one voice, you're talking about the same thing. And at the end of the day, ultimately, your goal is to attain good governance. And so when you work together, it is much easier. No one is isolated, and there are no lone voices speaking from little anthills shouting one particular tone. Also, try and protect and safeguard the process. Do not politicize the process. You'll find that when you engage as CSOs, most times predominantly, most of us work in the area of democracy and political governance, and it's very easy for the process to get politicized. So try and avoid that and safeguard yourselves from that. One other thing that's very important is to find a way of sustaining the momentum. I talked about the APRM in Zambia taking 7 years before we could actually get to review stage. And it was very hard at some points to sustain the momentum, because at a point there is fatigue. people get tired, they stop talking about it, they feel like it's dead, they feel one way or the other. So you have to find creative ways of sustaining the momentum and ensuring that you go all the way to the very end. And having said that, the idea of the APRM is not just to identify issues, but to find solutions. And how is that done? That is done through the National Program of Action, which is the implementation framework of all the issues identified. Now, I think even my colleagues from other countries will attest to this, but when you get to the National Program of Action, CSOs tend to fizzle out. The momentum is done. You're so tired from pushing, from advocating, from sensitizing, from writing, that you tend to disengage from the process and leave it to government, because often it appears the National Program of Action is funded by government and these things are supposed to be sorted at that level. So it's very, very important for us to ensure that even when the National Program of Action is out, you begin to look at what ways you can monitor the implementation of it. And then I would still say that having a civil society submission is very key, because it helps you to engage in a focused manner. And once you share your submission widely, it's very important to share that submission widely, because everybody knows what the issues are and they're able to pick it up from there. Also, civil society should continuously complement the process. I know that overall, the process will be supported by government through the focal point ministry, etc. But it's very important for CSOs to complement the sensitization and awareness, because civil society generally has got a very big demographic and following. So using whatever means you can, whether it's flyers, whether it's car stickers, your radio programs, whatever your current programming is, if you're going to go out and do training in rural areas on health, for example, get them to factor in the APRM and do that work, because I do know that one of the issues is always the issue of funding. There's never enough money to do all these things, but use what you have, your existing networks, your existing programs. Factor in a 1-hour session, 30-minute session, talking about the APRM. You already have existing radio programs. See how that is linked to the APRM and continue to use those platforms to raise awareness around the process. So in conclusion, I think civil society engagement on the APRM should be so rigorous so that they are part and parcel of the program, without which the process would be a challenge, you know. It's the duty of civil society organizations together with government to ensure that the other governance programs are streamlined into the APRM, because at the end of the day, you agree with me that the APRM has got all the elements of governance when you look at the 4 thematic areas. And I will conclude there and say thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share experiences. I mean, it's been such a long journey for me personally. I've been involved with the APRM from about 2005. I see my colleague Patrick Mpezisi and Steve, they were the first people who told me about the APRM long before we even acceded to this process. I had no clue, but from that point on, I've been so passionate about this process because I have seen the great works that the APRM has done and where we are going. There's so much, the Continental Secretariat has changed in so many ways. And I'm really excited for this journey for Zimbabwe. I think Zimbabwe will do very well, and I wish all the CSOs in Zimbabwe the very best. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Susan. I don't know about everyone, but I think I have already learned a lot. So you can imagine what more we will get from the next 3 countries that will share their experiences with us. So next we'll have Dietrich from the Institute for Public Policy Research in Namibia. Dietrich, I don't know if you have a presentation or you are just going to talk as Susan did, but it's your time now. So you have 10 minutes. Please try to stick to the time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and good morning, colleagues. I did not have the time to prepare a presentation, so I will just speak off the cuff. I hope that's okay. I must say, Susan, that was a very good presentation, and a lot of the issues and sort of points you mentioned did also resonate with me, thinking about our APRM process. So Namibia is still very much at the start of the process. Our government only agreed to the process in 2017 because prior to that they felt it wasn't really necessary. But I think then they eventually came around and said, okay, this is something worthwhile and that we should engage with. So since then, we've been sort of moving the process forward. And I think what is quite important, and maybe I can just stress this also what Susan said, is that really civil society gets their act together and is proactive in driving this process, driving the engagement and getting engaged and getting a good understanding of what is required and moving forward from there. So for Namibia, a lot of help, of course, was provided for SIA. We had one big challenge in that civil society's coordination here is very weak. Most of our umbrella bodies in the country for civil societies are defunct or struggling with funding. So in this sense, IPBR took over something which we haven't really had that much experience with. So getting the support, the documentation, and so forth from SIA was really helpful. And basically moving from there, I also think what we did as Namibia was we had a bit more of an informal working group that then worked on the submission, the CSO submission to the government regarding the APRM process, as well, of course, to the APRM Secretariat, which in a way was positive because we could, use our existing networks, approach people who we really know were knowledgeable about issues that we wanted to raise, and then get a submission out, work on a submission, a technical good submission fairly fast. But that obviously also had a drawback that we felt we actually would need to do some more work, is to raise, or get input from grassroots level organizations, because most of the NGOs that eventually gave input into our Namibian submission were mostly all based in the capital because they were easy to access, easy to approach. So it had benefits and drawbacks, and the drawbacks was really that we probably should have involved more grassroots level organizations. So that is sort of one of the takeaways, I think, from us. So yeah, what I also want to support what Susan says is that there was a lot of, with us, 2018 was basically taken up with a lot of engagement with stakeholders, specifically government. I think one of the first meetings we actually had was with the presidential spokesperson in sometime in 2018, who then encouraged us and said, this is a good opportunity for civil societies to come on board, and also to actually use that as an opportunity to put a bit of pressure on government and said, we've agreed to this in 2017, so let's get the process going. So in that sense, it was really a positive opportunity. And again, as Susan said, we continue trying to engage government officials as we moved forward in this process to let them know more or less where we were, to inform them about new activities that we did, share documentation, and so forth. And I think that really built quite a good relationship. We worked here especially with the Ministry of International Relations, who was sort of the focal point from government for this exercise, as well as the National Planning Commission. Those were two of our main stakeholders from government side. And they were quite supportive, sometimes a bit slow, but that's okay. They were there and they were engaged. So I hope maybe Zimbabwe and their process can also, build some sort of positive relationship. We also tried to sort of emphasize really in our working group using data, and a lot of data, of course, national data that is provided by government statistic agencies. So we made use a lot of that, which I think from a government side was also positive, since we didn't pull out, I think Dalma was talking about, how important the use of national data is. And we really tried to focus on this, to also make a submission that was technically sound and had, relevant data. Also, a good point that Susan made is, picking certain topics that NGOs are passionate about, that they have experience with, I think is very helpful. It's a very in-depth, deep process that Aprm is. So I think it's sensible for CSOs to really focus on the kind of things that they're knowledgeable about, they're passionate about, and they really can talk to. That shouldn't stop you, of course, looking at other things as well. So I think Steve mentioned we picked about 13 themes, and we came to these themes in a sort of rough consensus within the working group. We discussed this, I think, in the first 2 or so workshops we had on this issue, and then moved forward. We then, so issues around health, for example, youth and employment, as was mentioned previously, I think by Steve, was a big topic with us, as well as education. And I think the dominance of the executive in our political system was also a point that we raised. Maybe just a bit about the process itself. We didn't have a once-off meeting. We actually had a number of meetings with our civil society colleagues. And as I mentioned, we had this established group which met regularly, had workshops with the support of SIA, also technical support in terms of actually writing the report, the submission report from CSOs, and then basically designated strong individuals in that team to write certain sections. For example, I think I wrote a section around, if I remember correctly, it was health, but I also gave additional support to the person who was writing on education. So this is basically how we worked, and we had certain deadlines. Another positive thing, maybe I want to quickly point out, we did actually manage to get, I can't quite remember who supported that, I think it was a CISA, get some funding for people who actually wrote part of the submissions as a sort of incentive. I think you can all understand, NGOs, it's not always an easy place to be. So it's nice if there's a bit of a monetary incentive for people who really do the hard work. So that was, I think, we found quite positive. I don't know what option there is in Zimbabwe for funding like this, but of course, if you're able to get something like that for the people who actually do the writing, I think that really has paid off here in Namibia. So I don't want to take too much of the time. Like I said, we had a bit of a more informal working group, yet we tried to stay engaged. IPPR sort of drove the process from our side here, trying to keep people motivated, trying to keep them on board. And that took quite a lot of time. Yes, maybe that I can quickly mention. So one of the issues is for CSOs over there that the whole process takes a lot of time. There were a lot of activities, mostly with government in 2018. And then the real work with CSOs was in 2019, workshops, engaging stakeholders, writing the submission. Finalizing the submission was also quite a challenge because we had to get people on board again, which haven't really been part of the process for the whole time. So we had to basically go back again and engage people and get them to maybe send some of the final recommendations that were still outstanding. So again, for IPPR and SIA, it was important to sort of keep on the ball and maintain focus. And I think it's positive also that Susan said, Zambia recognized the importance of this and actually had their own secretariat, which we didn't. We sort of tried to manage it in-house while we're doing all our other projects. And that can be quite challenging, I have to admit. So we finally then managed to submit a submission. There was a little event. What also helped, I think, for the submission is that in terms of also getting recognized by government, that we got it properly laid out. We got a proper report. We got a proper printed physical report. And I think it's also can be accessed on our website currently. And and we could give that to the government representative, I think, who was by then sort of heading the focal point. I think it was an Ambassador Mboti from the Ministry of International Relations. And that event in mid-2019 also gave civil society, again, sort of opportunity to engage with government and sort of, yeah, up the pressure again and said, you know, civil society came to the table. We delivered a technical, sound and professional report and document. Again, driving that process and putting, I didn't want to say putting government on the spot, but sort of saying, you know, we have done this, now it's on you to move forward. I'm almost done. Maybe just something quickly, one thing that I wanted to mention. We've spoken about, a number of members, previous presenters have spoken about the importance of the National Government Council and its makeup. We did make from IPPR side more informally a number of suggestions of who would actually be sensibly from civil society, I think also from the private sector, that could then eventually sit on the NGO, National Government Council, Governing Council. There was a bit of an internal back and forth, because I think government initially wanted to dominate this council, and we sort of, before running to the press or making it public, we sort of tried to solve this issue internally using the relations we had established within the process, saying, you know, pointing out that, you know, the Aprm guidelines, that the AU guidelines said, you know, you have to be representative, you have to have members of civil society, members of, you know, the corporate sector represented on this committee. You can't just dominate it by yourself. So that was a bit of a push and pull, but government did then eventually acknowledge and said, this was all internal, mind you, did say, we agree. And based on that, they took up a number of our suggestions from people who should serve on the council. It is still quite government heavy, but I think we sort of struck a fairly good balance in representation. But maybe that's something that one has to be cognizant about and really make sure that, you know, the CSO interests are represented and not just dropped under the table, which can be challenging, we do admit, but it's there. Another thing, maybe just finally to round it off, is also that the process is, as a number of other speakers have mentioned, very slow. So that's important to sort of keep on board and continue being engaged. Also internal, having good communications with your fellow CSOs, maybe designating a special focal point or secretariat, even if you have the resources or you can find the resources, then that's very positive. We had a bit of challenges going on forward with internal communication. Namibia now has a fairly new CSO umbrella body, so we're hoping that with that support, we can move forward positively in the APR process. And thank you. That's basically it from my side.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dietrich. I'm just thinking of the different synergies and areas of alignment between what you have already mentioned, Zambia, Namibia, and possibly Zimbabwe, what we will experience. And I'm also thinking around how we haven't had an NGC formed already. So the lessons that the two countries already shared will come in quite handy. And then next we will have Ms. Pale from Botswana giving us their experiences and best practices. Ms. Mpale, you can take it on.
Thank you. Thank you for the convenience of this meeting, Sivo and Saya, the Aprm Secretariat. Then I greet you all colleagues from the region. My internet is unstable, so I might switch off the video. So I apologize for that.
It's okay, you can go ahead.
First of all, before I go into the lessons lessons learned, or what I can share with you about how the process in Botswana unfolded, let me just say that Bokongo is a council that coordinates all NGOs in Botswana. We have more than 200 plus members that are in good standing. The way the council operates is that it has 6 thematic areas where our member organizations are divided according to the organization mandate. So also as a national body, we do have representation at regions, which is all across the 4 corners of Botswana. And then the thematic leaders and regional coordinators make up the board of Bokongo. So I just wanted you to understand the dynamics of how, as the council, how we operate. And then in Botswana ascended to the Aprm in January 2019, but we started the implementation as civil society in March 2020. We had 5 activities which were pre-planning. That was the only activity that we did have face-to-face. And then thereafter, there was the training workshop, online workshops, submissions. And then in all these activities, they had to be, the way of delivery have to be changed, because that was now the time that COVID started. So the implementation team had to adjust plans to be tailored for online delivery. So our first online delivery was very good. We had representation from government and all civil society organizations. And then the very first face-to-face meeting that we had, we already had the working team, the working technical team that we're going to put the key issues together. And in March 2020, that was when the working group was formed to discuss the key issues, governance issues. We came up with 12 issues, among them, just to mention a few: citizen participation and inclusion, electoral systems, education, vulnerable groups, foreign policy, just to mention a few. So they totaled to 12 issues all in all. And our own delivery was on Zoom, and we thank Saya for having provided to have assisted us in providing data so that we have good audience, and that is how we managed to have good audience and keeping the momentum of civil society actually participating in all the online deliveries that we had. And then after also putting together the 12 issues that we thought were pertinent as civil society organizations, there was an incentive to actually thank the people that put together those 12 issues. So Bokongo is a civil society organization, having agreed to partner with Saya so that we sensitize Botswana about the Aprm was for several reasons. Among others, is just was to produce a comprehensive governance assessment of Botswana's strengths and weaknesses, to develop a recommendation to remedy shortcomings that can influence good policies, was also to open civic space for civil society organizations and citizens through the dialogue it promoted, and then also to create awareness among Botswana civil society on what needs to be done to make the Botswana Aprm process more effective and inclusive. And then the other reason why we agreed was so that we could initiate discussions about governance challenges experienced by Botswana for civil societies organization to be adequately prepared and capacitated. And then also, not only at civil society level, even at national level or at country level, the Aprm process is very integral in this, that it even gives the whole country the opportunity to showcase its best practices to its peers, how well it has been run, the processes that they do have of inclusion, of transparency, and then even seeing where they are in terms of accountability. And then it potentially attract investors and development assistance that if other onlookers out there are seeing that Botswana is doing well, it can be given as a shining star. Then, you know, a lot of investors will be interested to associate themselves with such a country. And we did have challenges, like I mentioned. Our implementation started to roll around March, which in April we had a total lockdown, whereby there was a restricted movement, and only people that were allowed to move were essential services providers. So most of the time, people were in their homes, and then that is one of the challenge that we experienced as we rolled out our implementation process. So this is the time when now even institutions were closed. We couldn't, the 12 issues that we had to put together because we needed resource material from other institutions. We couldn't do it there and there. We had to wait for the lockdown to elapse, which took about a month, 2 months for things to get back to a bit of a normalcy that now where people now could go back to the workplaces and help others. So the lessons that we learned that I would like to give to Zimbabwe as they embark on a similar journey is that we learned that including all the civil society organization in the process really helped to speed up the implementation process, because all civil society felt that as a collective, when they come together, they can really make a positive impact. And I think it was something that I think they were all waiting for. The minutes we discussed, we had meetings with them, they were very showing eagerness, even they were very zealous about the rolling up of the Aprm. And it was also fun that we even started to implement before even government did, because even now government hasn't really started its implementation because of COVID and other reasons. But we are happy that as civil society, among all the challenges that COVID came with, we were able to put together a submission that right now it's at design level. We are looking at launching the final submission sometime in April. So it has been really a good package that we could say that we managed to overcome even under the COVID strenuous times. And then the other lesson is that having a council like Bukongo, where we do have representation all over the country, and where we coordinate civil society organization, and as the council, it was really crucial that somebody of that magnitude or an organization of that magnitude really puts civil society or NGOs together, so that they are pushed, they're encouraged, they're motivated, so that the obligations that we did make of putting together articles, of putting together the final submissions is actually realized and fulfilled. So we and then also having online deliveries, like having a WhatsApp group where we would share a lot of messages regarding Aprm, just to keep the momentum of the whole thing, so that it doesn't die out with us being maybe at our houses, because that was the time of a total lockdown in Botswana. And then the other thing is that trying to simplify the whole process of Aprm, you know, it's very crucial, because you would want a lame person to actually understand what Aprm is all about, what it stands for, you know, trying to simplify exactly to the person what is it about, what it does, what are the benefits from inception, and also taking the politics out of it. Because as a non-partisan organization that we don't want to be associated, to be confining to any other party, as a council, it's very important and very crucial, because it gives the people that you associate with a more relaxed, loyal kind of a basis of a relationship, that they'll know that whatever that will come from there is not influenced by any party politics. So also keeping politics away from the process is one of the things that we did as the Secretariat, as the council for NGOs here. And then it really worked. And then the other thing is that we have to raise awareness through the Aprm with the media relations that we do have in Botswana. We were able to have interviews. We were even featured in the national television of Botswana just to show the unrolling of the process, what it was. So, which was giving people hope to see that the visibility part and the communication part of the strategy was there. People were knowing it, and even keeping government on its toes, to actually trying to be part and parcel of the whole thing, wanting to know how the process is unfolding, asking relevant questions, meeting us, engaging us, so that by the time they also implement, they all have they've already planned for everything that it's supposed to be planned for. And then the other thing is that government is willing to listen, as long as we as civil society, we engage them. And then we have to find a strategy of how exactly to infuse them or to engage them, because in our processes, in all the processes, we invited them in all the activities that we had. We gave them the opportunity to be present, even though civil society was spearheading the whole process, but we gave them the process to be there, for the presence to be felt, for just to engage, so that also they take they're there and also can advise even during the gathering of the information. So you just have to find what are the best way of engaging them, and then having to master how you could expand the engagement, so that also is not diluted, that before you know it, the whole process now government have taken over. So there has to be also limitations of how you also engage them. And yeah, I think those were the lessons that I would say. And yeah, and also there was a resource material that Saya was sharing with the Secretariat, the Bukongo, and then that resource material was lesson learned from Zambia, from Namibia. That is why our lessons resonate each other, because we really took the lessons on board, and they guided us in the way we engaged. So even the materials that were sent, we make use of them by thoroughly reading exactly what the material was saying, so that we could understand even the process even more. So those materials that are being shared. The materials.
Sorry, can we please have everyone muting their mics except for the presenter? Thank you. Go on, my fellow.
Okay. So the material that was shared was a really good base just to understand Aprm process more. So I would urge countries, Zimbabwe, to actually make use of the material that Saya brings on board, to actually read it and understand it the way you don't understand, and ask questions, because that's a very important thing to know how the process will unfold. And then lastly, I could just like to advise organizations to always be true in what they believe in, and stand still and firm, especially on things that are of national interest, because the Aprm is a tool of national interest that we should all try to rally behind it to see that it succeeds. And then the Aprm process is not an easy thing to do. It needs a lot of commitment and dedication to yield positive results and to have the desired impacts that you would envision. So it's going to be a lot of commitment that is going to be required from the implementation team. So, but the secret is to fully work together and to do your stakeholder analysis and engage all the stakeholders that are relevant for you to be able to enroll or to unfold this process. And then because it needs a lot of hands, it needs a lot of people together, because it can't be done by one organization or by one institute, but it needs all the institutions to be fully on board. And then because if not done correctly, it can be a very tedious and a very tiring exercise. But if you take all these lessons that we have gone through, because we as in Botswana, we have tried to take all the lessons. That is why really our process wasn't that strenuous, wasn't that polluted, because we really took the lessons that other member countries before us really seriously, and then we actually internalize them, we use them, and then we became progressive in a way. So my last words is just to wish you a beautiful and fruitful journey as you embark on your journey. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, My Pillow. I think everyone, the government officials present during this workshop, as well as the different CSOs that we have, are actually appreciating the different lessons that we're learning from the different countries. And I think exactly as you did point out, My Pillow, that there are so many areas of convergence between the 3 different countries that we've heard speaking so far. So I think as Zimbabwe, we have so much to learn, and I'm hoping that we also have a successful and fruitful process because of the lessons that you have shared. So lastly, we will have Dimpo from South Africa, who will give us the experiences with the process. And then after that, it will take us to, I think, about 15 minutes of question and answer. So I do see some questions and comments on the chat box. Please keep them coming. And then we will have a session rightly after Dimpo presents. Dimpo? Did we lose Dimple?
She did say that she was having some connection issues. I'm not sure if she's on.
I do see her on, but I think she's not speaking. Dimple, can you hear us? Maybe as we're waiting for her to log in, I can just take us through some of the comments that we have. We had, I think it's Kota. She said that really excellent inputs from the panelists. I really appreciated the sharing on both the technical side and some of the process issues. I would have loved to be part of the process, but she had to leave. So she was thanking Saya as well as the local partners. And then I did note that I think Marlon Zakeo had a question around how the Aprm country review process has adapted to the new challenges. And I think My Pillow did try to allude to the different challenges that they had, especially given that they had to take on or implement the process right at the peak of COVID-19. And I think the other main question, I think, My Pillow, if you can answer, is how credible were the reviews? So how credible was the implementation process, given that you had to operate under a COVID setup? My Pillow?
Yes. I didn't hear the question.
Did you get the question? Okay, the question was really how, as Botswana, you had to implement the process during a COVID setup. So you did talk about how you had to do some virtual sort of engagements. So how credible do you think that type of engagement was, given that you had to do it mostly virtually or part of it virtually?
Okay. No, it was very credible because The only thing that we did different was, instead of us having to sit in one room and gathering in one room, was to have a virtual meeting so that we don't gather in one place. But as far as the material used, research done into putting together the 12 issues, we went all out because there was nothing that was hindering us to actually get good publications, good research. And it was even good because you could do it even in the confinement of your home where you have time. So the credibility, the online delivery didn't really have an impact on the credibility of our submission. Actually, it even made us to even have more time and to go all out to actually find the information when you are confined and in your house. But I wouldn't say that it had any impact. Thank you.
Great, thanks, my fellow. And then I think I will ask Daytrick as well as Susan to just come in on this one. We have a person asking how the APRM has aided the Zambia and Namibia, the countries in institutional building. So maybe we can have Susan come in first. I hope she's still on. And then we can have Daytrick just giving us sort of a roundup of how the APRM has helped so far. Susan? You are still on mute. I can see you are online, but you're muted. Okay, I don't know if we've lost her. Daytrick, can you pick it up?
Yes, sure. So thank you for that question. In terms of institutional building, so I think it was quite a good experience of the participating CSOs, because that did help them to build a bit of capacity, and especially in terms of, understanding the APR process, engaging with the APR process, productively, and also actually coming together in a sort of broad coalition to write, which was actually quite a substantive report, and also agreeing on what should go into the report. So I think that was quite a positive. That was something positive for all the CSOs who took part and did help in somewhat building their institutional capacity. If you talk about government, I'm not so sure what they took away from that. I think they just took away that it was good to actually engage with civil society members, and also see, a positive side, us contributing to a kind of national effort, if you will. So that's basically my answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Daytrick. Susan, are you able to take that on before I take on anything else?
I'm back. I'm sorry, I keep going offline. We have heavy rains here now. So
Okay.
if you could kindly repeat the question, please.
Okay, that's fine. So the question was really around how maybe if you can share how the APRM has aided or shaped Zambia in institution building. So maybe you can talk around the CSOs. I don't know if you can speak for the government part, but generally how the APRM process has aided in institutional building.
All right, thank you. The APRM has really aided in the sense that most of the CSO engagements now are based mostly on what came out of the APRM documentation, and even with the targeted review, there was a lot of input that we made to that particular process as CSOs. I cannot definitely speak for government, but I can speak from the civil society standpoint. And also on this platform, I'm joined by my colleague Guest Nurenda, who's been involved with the APRM process from the onset and was one of the first NGC members and still sits on the NGC. So maybe he too could share a few views from that perspective.
Okay, great. Thanks, Susan. If they can, please unmute, or you can use the chat box.
Natai,
maybe
Dimpo has
yes,
been able to connect. So I know we're running quite late. It's 12:24. Yeah. But I do think the South African experience is valuable to listen to. So if people will, just bear with us. Hopefully, if you have to go to something else, we understand that. We are scheduled to go till 1. We may go a little bit over.
Okay, great. So maybe we can have Dimpo whilst Susan's partner maybe can share their experiences on the chat platform if they can't unmute their mic at the moment. So Dimpo, I'll leave it over to you. Maybe we can give you about 7 minutes to present.
Okay, thank you so much. So I have quite an unstable internet connection, so I do apologize in advance if I do get cut off in the middle of my presentation. My name is Dimpo Lecheu. I work with a youth policy think tank based here in Johannesburg called Youth Lab. And basically what we do is we try to make sure that young people are meaningfully engaged in the process of developing and implementing policies, all through to monitoring and evaluation. And my interaction with the Aprm process was quite recently with the South African Popular Sensitization Project, where we also contributed to the Youth in Civil Society submission. So I'm just going to share briefly some of the things that I learned, especially as someone who is quite new in the youth development space through that research process. First of all, it was quite insightful to hear from young people how they feel about leadership. Obviously, this is a very collaborative process. And so young people from a multitude of youth organizations that targets different areas of youth development were invited. And it was just so insightful, and it added value to the work that I do as well. As someone who works in youth development, to hear about how they feel about the trust deficit between young people and government, as well as how they feel they should be more meaningfully engaged in policy and decision-making processes. I think a very important part of the process was the initial meeting we had, where young people were given the opportunity to kind of shape the scope of the research, because they got to identify the key areas that they wanted to work on, and kind of frame the submission around. I'll quickly go to some of our challenges. An obvious one, COVID-19 presented serious challenges with how we work and how we meet, added to the fact that we obviously all have dynamic schedules. It was a youth research project, so there were young people who are working, young people who are still in school, and so working around that, as well as limited movement rights because of COVID-19 regulations. But we did try to make use of digital platforms, and some young people who were in Johannesburg were able to meet, and that was of course made possible through the budget that was given to us per group that was taking part in the research process. And then some of the other things that I learned through the process is that there's very limited data on youth experiences. I think in particular, qualitative data. And so that presented an opportunity for us to kind of leverage our networks and pose questions to young people when we couldn't turn to the internet or we couldn't turn to a document to find the answers that we were looking for. In terms of why should organizations, civil society organizations, take part in the process, I'll say that the process is an opportunity to really evaluate government's performance in implementation and development processes. It provides an opportunity to collaborate with other organizations, which can only strengthen our work in this space. It's also an important opportunity to make recommendations, right, on how the government can better achieve development objectives. This was a very, very important part of the submission for us. I think that as young people, we were so focused on fact checking, making sure that our research is on point. We didn't really think through the recommendations and what our picture of success looks like, when that actually should have been our focus point, because we are really submitting this document to say this is the kind of society, this is the kind of government that we kind of envision to lead us. And then I think throughout listening to the speakers, there has been a very strong emphasis on, ownership of the process. So a word of advice would be to make sure that all of the participants are actively taking part in the process, and you don't just have one or two experts kind of leading the process, but that you make sure that everyone is actively participating and feels that they also get to own the process. And lastly, I think, especially with COVID-19 kind of changing the way that we work, it's important to set clear timelines, to have clear kind of roles in the group. And I think someone else mentioned this, using WhatsApp as a tool to share information, or creating a shared document to share resources. I know that my presentation did not happen how I had envisioned, so I might have been a bit disorganized, but I really hope that I managed to relay information and that you picked up something valuable.
Thank you so much, Dimple. I think what we're really getting from the South African experience is really how the youth can be involved, the role of youth and the need to have or include youth in participation of this particular process. So what we have, I think, on our screens, if you can all see, is a poll. So remember what Belinda did tell us, that it's an anonymous poll. So literally what we're trying to gauge and get from this is, are you interested in working or joining the working group that would develop the Zimbabwe Aprm submission? So really, you would answer yes or no. So what we will take from this is who is going to be involved in the different working groups that we need to have the final written submission for the Aprm. So please do take on the poll. We would really appreciate your inputs and insights. And then I think if you can, also don't mind to drop in your email addresses, and then we can always be chatting after the process. So I don't know if we have anyone who has a question around this particular session before I hand over to Eda, who's leading the process. So I think you are free to unmute yourself if you have a question or a comment around the lessons that we've learned from our colleagues from the different 4 countries. If not, you can always use the chat platform. I don't know if we have any insights from our government officials from the ministry, anyone from the CSOs or any stakeholders present. Okay, I don't see any hands at the moment, but just remember that we can always use the chat platform to have any questions or comments.
Madam Chair, just to call your attention to the 2 hands that are up.
Okay, I could not see any.
So we have Tafadzwa and Patrick.
Yes. Awesome. Maybe in that order, we can have Tafadzwa and Patrick. Thanks, Lwanda.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you so much.
Yes, hi, Tafadzwa.
Yes, can you hear me?
Clearly, yes, we can. Go on.
Okay, I'll be as brief as I can. I would like to thank all the panelists for sharing their insights. I just wanted to find out from the country representatives in the region, how were they able to manage the diverse civil society groupings? I am asking because right now in Zimbabwe, there are very loose civil society coalitions, and that used to be strong, but they are now weakened. So I wanted just to hear from you in terms of how did different countries manage to come together and find a common platform. I might have missed the interventions at some point. Thank you, Madam Chair, over to you.
Great question, Tafadzwa. I think that's a really good reflection of the current CSO network that we have. I think Susan, Dietrich, Dimple, and Maipelo, you can come in and try to tell us. I think I know from Botswana, you did talk about the organization, the main organization. I think it's Bokongo that managed to do this. And I think another one also spoke around how they managed to come up with a CSO coalition. So maybe you can just give us in brief how you managed to do that.
Okay, I'll go first. It's Susan.
Thanks, Susan.
So for us, what we did was we created a civil society secretariat. And the secretariat was a loose alliance of different CSOs, including their umbrellas. So I think the situation in Zambia at the time was quite similar to what's happening to Zimbabwe as well, like the state of civil society in Zimbabwe right now. And so what we did was we created a loose alliance that was spearheaded by one of the organizations. So let me put it in practical terms. So for Zimbabwe, for example, what you would do is maybe since Civo is having this meeting, you can invite all these different divergent civil society groups that represent all these different thematic areas and talk about the Aprm. And for those that are interested in being a part of it, you create a loose alliance that is going to oversee this process. So what we did in the Zambian context was when the Secretariat was established, it was housed by one of the organizations. It was not a registered entity. It was never ever registered. So it was hosted by an organization in Zambia called FODEP. And for all the funding, whether we went to look for funding or programming, we worked under the framework of FODEP. And the agreement was that it would be a revolving secretariat to give chance to each organization to host it at a point. So from FODEP, it moved to Caritas Zambia, it moved just like that. So all the members could still input to the process, but the secretariat was never really registered. But then at the same time, if you do not want to have a secretariat, you can just have a loose alliance, the way that I think Zimcode used to do. You can just have a loose alliance where you bring different organizations, you have your regular meetings, you develop a work plan that you can streamline with your existing work plans. And obviously, when like we are having this conversation now, and obviously most CSOs have already done their programming for the year. So for them to participate, in most instances, they'll tell you that the budgets have already been aligned. So how then do they now budget for the Aprm? So you have to try and work within what works in your already existing, work plans. I hope that answers your question, Stafadwa.
Thank you so much, Susan. Between Daytrick, Dimpo, and Maipelo, is there anyone who wants to give a different perspective or maybe buttress what Susan said?
Yes, here in Botswana, like I was saying, I think what favored us was that we are the third society of the state, which is civil society, and we have a body, a standing body of all the NGO sectors, that Bokongo is the one that coordinates everything that has to do with NGOs in Botswana. So I think strategically, that is what favored us. Even the member organizations that didn't affiliate with Bokongo, we brought them on board under the premise of that they fall under the NGO sector. So we didn't really have problems to convene or to bring them together, even those that were not affiliated. So I think with us, because of maybe the positioning that we are or we take in the country of just clumping them together as NGO sectors and then them being controlled or coordinated at this particular place, I think it really helped us. So I don't know with the dynamics of how other countries did it, but that is how we did it. And then when they got into the Secretariat further, they are divided according to the mandate of what the organizations does, because we work according to thematic groupings that we have. We do have 6 thematic groups. So that is how we did it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Maipelo. I understand that Patrick's hand is up. So Patrick, you can go, and then I'll take on, I think there's a question from Hard Life, and I think Daytrick did try to answer that on the chat platform, but we can have Patrick and then maybe Hard Life and Daytrick come in. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Mine is not necessarily a comment, it's just to add on to the discussion, because I did have an opportunity to engage with the Aprm as far back as 2004 when I was working in Kenya. And as Susan pointed out, we also supported the beginning of their process. So being a Zimbabwean, obviously, I'm very happy to see the process finally come here. And maybe a few things that I can just mention that can be very helpful, which help our thinking at the early stages of the Aprm. I think you have to consider that you're dealing with issues around process and issues around content. And for this, it means that you have to get quite organized and quite quickly. The time frame that I heard from Steve means that we are kind of a bit behind already. So we need to really work quite smartly and quite early. And I think to just help, we kind of thought about it in 5 C's a long time ago. And we said the first thing is C, to coordinate, which is the coordination part. And this is very, very important, to find a body that is willing and able to coordinate. And the irony about the Aprm is that the Aprm almost acts like a mirror towards civil society in your country. The way it appeared in Kenya was very different from the way it appeared in Zambia, and I can promise you it will be very different in Zimbabwe. So the context in which we are working in will mirror itself even in the Aprm as we work around. And the coordination means that you look at the process both at the national level, within civil society. Then you also have to look at coordination with across sectors, where you look also at private sector and others that will come on board. And then you also have to engage with the government. Then you also have to engage with the Aprm Secretariat. So the coordination means that you have to equip yourselves very quickly with the process and understand the stages of engagement and how to engage. The second C is the consolidation. And this is also very important because this is where you have to look at content and where it's coming from, and to try and get to be as inclusive as possible in getting views from different stakeholders. That means that you kind of have to not look at just who is in the meeting, but which sector are they coming from? So for instance, the question Hard Life asked at some point, and Hard Life coming from the Community Water Alliance and working with Residents Association means that you have to get the Residents Association to come up with a position. You have to get youth to come up with a position. So there's a lot of consolidation that has to happen around that. And that again means that if the coordination is effective, then the consolidation can be much better. The third C is coherence. And this is coming out a lot more now than it was at the early stages of the Aprm, because there are a number of processes that are happening that even us as Zimbabweans we are part of. We have SDG reporting going on. We've got Agenda 2063 going on. We've got national planning going on. You also have institutions that are working with the Human Rights Council, with the African Peer, with the African Charter, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. And all of this has to be brought together so that you begin to present a coherent position, because the Aprm does not necessarily operate on its own. But what it does is that it's able to bring together a number of processes that are happening. So the coherence part becomes very important to figure out all the stages in which government is actually being involved in governance, the African governance architecture, etc. And the fourth C to me is creativity. You really have to be creative about this process. It may look like it's high technical, documentation and everything, but everyone who engages in it has to be very creative. It is not merely about writing reports and having reports ready and having processes set up, etc. It actually goes to the end result, which is what then do you do in order to improve governance within a particular country. And just to show you how ironic it is, Zimbabwe has actually used some of the best practices that have come from Aprm already, right? a good example is ZIMRA. ZIMRA used the best practice that was picked up from SARS, from the South African Revenue Authority. So that just gives you an indication that even as civil society, it does not end by just simply being in this process and writing a report, but figure out what else can you get from other countries in terms of the best practices. Where can you situate your advocacy using some of the lessons that have come from other countries. In some cases, it makes something more official within the African realm. For instance, South Africa, one of the first times when xenophobia was actually being talked about in South Africa was because it was picked up by the Aprm, and then it made it a political issue. And lastly, canniness, because as much as we've talked about this in a very pleasant way, it is actually still a very contested terrain, and you will have competition within civil society, competition between civil society and government, competition to get the voices of the eminent persons, etc., etc. So you have to be shrewd, and you have to understand when you can engage everybody and when you actually have to act fast to get a position across. So all of this has to come together in order for civil society to be effective if they're going to take this up, and specifically within the limited time that is left and the limited resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I think those really great insights coming from you. Unfortunately, I think our time is not really on our side. Had life, I know you had raised a question, so I hope that you have been answered through the chat platform by Dietrich, but if not, just let us know. And then I think we also have one comment from Lorraine Mpasidi. I know she comes or represents one of the resident associations in Zimbabwe. And she says, I think one of the most important things at this stage is to build voice and agency amongst citizens through public awareness, influencing policy opinion and discourse on APRM, as well as build solidarity among CSOs for purposes of advocacy and engagement within government. And I think it's also tying up with the question that someone had around how the different countries manage to reach out to the ordinary citizens. So if resident associations, how do they manage to reach them through radio, TV, or newspapers? And then I know that I think our last presenter from Botswana, I think Moipelo, did indicate that they had 12 issue areas or key governance areas that they looked at. So I'll just ask Luanda, our colleague from SAIA, to also put up a poll. So we're literally asking which key issue areas do you think Zimbabwe should focus on? So this would also help us and the different CSO partner organizations to think about the issue areas that we would want to have on. So thanks, Luanda. I do see something being provided on the screen. And then after me, I think I'll just ask Dr. Marisa, given our time, to round up the event.
So Madam Chair, if I may, how this poll works is that participants may need to just take out their phones, and then there's a code that's projected here, and I can just say it out. It's 376736. To go on www.menti.com. Immediately when you access that website, it'll ask you for a code. You will input this code, and immediately we'll start inputting your views. And just to remind participants that this poll is anonymous.
So just repeat that again. It's www.menti.com, right?
Yes, it's also projected here on the screen, www.menti.com. And once participants are there, they can just use the code 376736. It's also here on the screen.
Awesome. Thanks, Luanda. So please do go on your phones if you can. And then I actually am on it. So it will ask you to enter the different governance issues that you think the APRM should focus on. So your inputs are really, really important. So I think after this, Luanda, if you're done, we can hand over to Dr. Marisa to finish off.
Yes, we certainly can. We will just be able to see the answers as they come in on the screen. So I'll leave the screen on, but Dr. Marisa can go ahead.
Awesome. Dr. Marisa, over to you.
Great stuff. Okay, thank you so much, colleagues, and for sort of spending Friday morning with us. It's close to 1 o'clock now, so I don't want to be the one who delays lunch. So the work is, like as already explained by Steve, is ongoing. We are now supposed to, between the month of March and April, which is literally starting from next week. I think there are two things based on what Patrick said. I nearly used his nickname, it's going to kill me. Based on what Patrick has said, I think, number one, I think the coordination part, I don't want to say, oh, it's finished because I had Severe Institute. It's something that I'm happy to open up. Instead of just having a working group that is writing papers, I also want to have a structure of sorts where we think it's inclusive. We're all happy with that. So I noticed that many people agreed to being part of this. So if my colleagues Eda and Belinda just reach out to the participants so that we map the different networks, associations, like the colleague from Zambia has mentioned that civil society at this time, in fact, Tafadzo mentioned it, it's very atomized, but in those little silos that have emerged, there is a logic around how organizations work and they are organized. So if there could be some reflection on some form of an ongoing check-in reference group, so we call that our reference group, then it's just for meetings so that they are also happy with what the working group will produce. So in the next month, we'll be reaching out to colleagues for meetings to do with our the working group around saying, based on even this poll that is ongoing, to begin to say what are the issues that should be in the report, what should we be talking about. I think the received wisdom from the different country presentations is that it's better to be modest about the number of issues you want to tackle. You can try to tackle everything but fail at everything. But if we based on the reference group, once we have agreed, based on this the checking we're doing, once we have agreed on that, then our working group will be structured in such a way to begin to say, number one, what would be the best way of carrying out this research so that it reflects opinions coming out of civil society. I cannot specify exactly how that process is going to pan out. I want us to have a meeting, hopefully either next week or the other week, where we discuss how we go about it. So initially, our reference group will be very loose, and hopefully big, try to represent different aspects of civil society, colleagues from the faith groups, colleagues from different sectors of society, even business, the associations that represent business to be part of it, associations that represent culture, then also the human rights guys, policy, governance, etc. All those groups to be part of it. Then we will see how we structure ourselves. But I would like to keep it loose so that people have the freedom of coming, checking in and checking out, but knowing that it exists and they have access to it. Then through that group, we'll have a consensus on the issues that we want to address, on the thematic issues we want to address. So that's the work, that's the task for the next 3 weeks around that. Then once we have that sorted out, then our working group, which will be mostly colleagues that carry out research but are based within civil society, can help us to put our thoughts together. The methodology for me should include a way of making sure that we are checking in. So it's not just a paper being written by somebody sitting on his desk or her desk, but we actually create these consultations so that the reports that we're producing are based on opinions or findings from civil society, and also to collect some studies that have been done by institutions that are within civil society. So I think I liked the last point, which was one of the most difficult ones that Patrick mentioned, this cunning thing, that is still contested terrain. But if we the good thing about it is Patrick is front loading this to us. He's not giving it to us at the end of the process, but because he's giving it to us at the beginning of the process, we can begin to say, how do we make this cunning to be much more pleasant, so that we don't work under the carpet, etc. Because what he's raising are real things, that there could be tough issues amongst ourselves as civil society organizations. There could be tough and disagreement issues between us and government, etc. But given that it's been front-loaded, it's coming at the beginning of the process. The question is, how do we organize ourselves to make sure that we don't have to do certain things that are out of bounds, etc. So I'm glad that it was raised. So I'm now beginning to say, how do we work around it to make it, instead of being cunning, to make it collaborative, instead of being contested, to make it something that we actually agree in terms of the spirit of the process, to say, we need to have this, we need to discuss truths to one another, be it to our colleague, with our colleagues to government, be it with other competing spaces within civil society. We all agree that it's just not about different alliances or coalitions. It's actually disagreements, actually, in terms of how we name the problem or how we frame the solutions to that problem. So once you have agreed to the fact that we are not always going to get agreement, and like Ambassador Faranis said in one of our meetings, says, consensus can be boring. If all of us agree on the same thing, what kind of society are we? So agreeing on the fact that we are going out there and we're going to face disagreements, but then agreeing on how we deal with those disagreements, so that we also do not present a fragmented position from civil society, is very important. As Severe Institute, I'll be very clear, we have no history of national mobilization of networks, of alliances, etc. That's not our core strength. So I would like, within that large umbrella sort of reference group, colleagues and organizations that have this kind of sort of background and that have done it before, then we work alongside each other to see how that can be done. So I think for me, that's sort of the way forward. And we'll also come up with a more specific sort of pathway document, which is like a one-page that just explains what we're doing from now on. And we'll share with all the groups that are here via email to say, these are the ideas of moving forward. Then in that document, people can make an input in terms of the sort of the steps that they would prefer to see, etc., etc. But and for us, it's not a contestation about saying we want to be the focal point as Severe Institute. We want to help coordinate civil society to a place whereby they are ready on their own. If it's not Severe Institute, it's somebody else who's going to sit maybe when government gets finalizes these processes. If they want to elect a representative from civil society to be part of that NGC, for us, it's fantastic. So we're not trying to occupy a certain position. We're just trying to help through this process, to, in fact, just to get the ball rolling, then we'll move forward. So I know some of you guys have been writing to me, trying to check us out. We are not in it for a position. We're in it for the work that needs to be done. And we want to work with everyone in civil society, want to work with government, just to make sure that the process takes off with the kind of technical support that we're receiving from SAIA and also from the Secretariat, who have been very generous, stayed on with this meeting, and they're available for us for further consultations. So in a nutshell, I would say that's the way forward. If there are any questions to do with the process, which is what Patrick, you're going to kill me. I'm always about to share your nickname, but this is from our childhood days, so let me not do that. So around coordination and also just moving forward around this process and also the content. So I think it's very important for us to think about it. And if there are any things that come to your mind now, let's just discuss them briefly. I know people are saying we have no time. We're left with 3 minutes before 1 o'clock. We can use that time just to discuss if I've missed out on anything. And even colleagues from SAIA, based on their experience working across the sub-region, you can also make an input at this stage. Was I talking to myself?
Thanks, Tendai. It's Steve. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Firstly, just to, as we're closing up, say a huge thank you to everybody who was part of this, especially the country representatives. It's so great to see this iterative learning process that one country learns from another, and shares their ideas. I got just a couple of suggestions. One is what's worked very well in Botswana and South Africa is the formation of WhatsApp groups. So you can have a big one for everybody and then a more targeted one, so on and so forth. So I think that's a very good way to keep in touch and keep working. There is a web page for this project, which we will supplement and add the presentations to. If you just search for Zaps, SAIA Zimbabwe, you'll find it. I can also post the link. And yes, we are here. We are pretty experienced in this and are ready to support you in whatever way possible. It's not easy. We understand the Zimbabwean context is probably one of the most complex and difficult terrains to be be working on this. But I think hopefully that today has made some difference to those of you who are doubting this process, that the journey can be as important as the destination. You may or may not be able to influence government policy in the end, and you may or may not provide the dialogue that Zimbabwe so desperately needs, but you will learn on the process and you can aim high. Also to say that we have made some resources available. That's one of the lessons that we've learned, that people like to be compensated for their time. We're not paying seating allowances or per diems, but if you're going to be doing some of the writing, yes, there are modest resources available for those who put their time into writing sections of the report. And that amount has been increased since we worked in Namibia. So, it's a reasonable amount. So there is budget. And also just to say a very big thank you to all my colleagues from our communications department and our events department, Luanda, who's my right-hand lady on this project, and also from the Civio side, Tendai, Eda, Natsai, Belinda, and colleagues, Sarasa and Ndumi from our events, Nikki and Spiwe from communications. Also to say thank you to CEDA for their great support and for trusting us with this important work. To Dalmar and Edgy, thank you really for spending your time with us. And of course, Susan, Dietrich, Maipelo, and Dimpo. Sorry, I know I'm doing some of the closing remarks, but those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Okay, thanks so much, Stephen.
Eda, you're breaking.
For that, I don't know if there's anyone who's got anything else to add, or maybe. Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, it's much better now. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So I just wanted to go or just ask if there's anyone else who might have a contribution or comment to make before we draw the meeting to a conclusion. Okay, if not, but I think definitely this is just the beginning of engagement and discussion. And I think as Tendai has alluded to, in the next couple of days or in the course of next week, we'll be sharing just insights on what will, the next steps and processes and what we've discussed today in terms of the way forward. So it's 2:02, and not to keep anyone else much longer, but just to say thank you to everyone who's been part of today's meeting. Thank you to our colleagues from Zambia, South Africa, Botswana, Namibia for sharing your experiences, and thank you to the colleagues from the Aprm Secretariat for your inputs as well. To SIDE, the entire SIDE team. Thank you as well to colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for being. With that, I'd just like to wish everybody a good rest of the day, and we will catch up and continue talking about this process going forward. So thank